Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. This is the 40th part of What If Deku Had Psychokinesis. I hope you enjoy. Link to the original story and author in the description. Chapter 40, Countdown to Term Finals. Part 2. 2 weeks until term finals. After returning home from dinner with the Midoriyas, Ochako hung up her uniform and threw the rest of her clothes into a small hamper. Pulling a fresh towel off the wall and slipping on a loose shirt and shorts, Ochako grabbed her little basket of soap and shampoo and aimlessly went down to the apartment building's community showers. Walking in, the soft echo of the room was a welcome sound. She had the room to herself tonight, not completely uncommon for the late hour. Finding a stall, Ochako hung everything up, turned the water on and stood motionless as the heated water sprayed her down and filled the stall, and soon the room, with steam. The water crashed off the tiles in the room, creating a deafening roar of rapids that let Ochako drown out the world while the water that beat against her skin cleaned her of the day's filth. Technically, she didn't need a shower. She had showered after her training was done. But after an evening with Hisashi, Ochako wanted one. Being in the same room with that man had left her feeling so unclean. Hisashi. The name was sour and putrid as it floated through her mind. A great vile stink that dirted her by its very existence. Dirted her and royally pissed her off. Arg, arg. The running water did a good job of concealing Ochako's scream of frustration. Crack. Less so when she punched the tiled wall in front of her, shattering the cheap material into a spider web of cracks. Ochako kept her fist pressed against the wall as she took several visceral, seething breaths through clenched teeth. Around the 10th or so breath, she was calm enough that she could pull her hand back and not throw another punch. The water stung her knuckles and a quick look let her see the water was running pink down her hand as the blood was washed away. She wished the rest of what she was feeling could be washed away as easily. After Hisashi had left and Inko had gone after him to talk, it had only been Ochako and Izuku left. After putting Eri to bed, Izuku just stood by his door, looking lost and confused. Like he had been after he had called his father weeks ago. Except this time it was worse. Izuku had so many different feelings inside of him, he couldn't make heads or tails of any of them. Last time it had been Bakugou that had snapped him out of it. Ochako didn't have the same harshness to do it herself. How do you tell someone that their father doesn't love them? Especially after the show the man had put on, coming off like a good parent. A loving father. Ochako was convinced it was fake. It had to be an act, even if it was a good one. But how do you say that? In the end, Ochako focused on plans for school the next day. Tried to take Izuku's mind off his father. It hadn't really worked, and when she finally said her goodbyes, she saw that Izuku was still conflicted. You fucking coward. Bakugou told Deku what he needed to hear. Toga would have too if she was there tonight. But you? No, you fucking left him alone because you didn't want to hurt his feelings. With a grunt, Ochako grabbed her washcloth and poured a little soap into it. With it nice and sudsy, she cleaned up her knuckles and then scrubbed herself down. Going forward, she was going to have to be better at this. It might make her uncomfortable, but she had to make sure Izuku remembered who he was dealing with. Now that Hisashi was here, Izuku's own natural empathy and kindness was working against him. Bakugou had used it against him. She was not going to let Hisashi do the same. The man was not going to take advantage of Izuku's nature to get back into his son's good graces just for his boss's approval. It hadn't been lost on Ochako that all this loving father bullshit had started when Hisashi's boss had been around and had expressed interest in Izuku. Hisashi was clearly trying to take advantage of the situation. She just needed to find a way to make Izuku see it. So that was one problem she needed to come up with a plan for. Now she just needed help with another. This fancy dinner. Ochako had no idea what she was getting in for. And if she was coming as Inko and Izuku's guest, she needed to be sure she didn't do something that made them look bad. Hisashi be damned. So, Yaoyorozu, how do I make sure I don't come off as a complete country bumpkin? I don't even know what kind of dress I should want to wear. Ochako dabbed her drying hair with her towel while keeping her phone pressed against her ear with her shoulder. I'm so far outside my comfort zone with this. After her shower, Ochako had decided she needed to get some advice. Momo had been the obvious choice to call for help. After a quick explanation of her situation, Momo was eager to help. Well, for a start, please tell me a little more about the event. You said it was a fancy dinner, but is this a private or social gathering? Ochako scratched at her bandaged knuckles as she thought about that. Private social? We're having dinner with the CEO of Detnarat. He's Deku's father's boss. But some of his important sounding friends apparently invited themselves too. Important sounding? Ochako listed off the people Hisashi had mentioned. She didn't have names for them, but the positions they held seemed to be more important anyway. Momo hummed as Ochako finished. And why was this dinner offer extended? This Mr. Yatsubashi really wanted a chance to meet with Deku. Ah. I see. So that's the game then. That makes a lot more sense now. Eh? What does? This isn't a dinner, Uraraka. It's a grooming session. That got Ochako's attention. Wait? Grooming? Midoriya is a precious commodity. His accomplishments make him valuable to those that value status and pedigree. He got first place in his entrance exam, and then went on to win the sports festival, while our class had a lot of extra attention on us because of the villain attack. Then to top it off, All Might himself puts his name out, in the most public way possible, to offer an internship. Put that all together, and of course some people are going to want to lead Midoriya into their corner. Ochako didn't like what she was hearing. Cheeks puffing out in annoyance, she grumbled, maybe I should tell Deku to not go, then. He and his family don't need this kind of garbage hanging onto them. There was a short pause and then a long sigh. Uraraka, I'm sorry, but that would be the most foolish and short-sighted advice you could give him. Honestly, it'd be imbecilic. It took Ochako a second to realize that Momo had just called her an idiot. Ochako needed a moment to let that sink in. You're, gonna need to explain that one. I'm sorry if that came off as harsh, but Midoriya and yourself have a unique chance here, and to squander it just doesn't make sense at all. You won't ever win if you don't play the game, Uraraka. Game? What game? Now the dinner is a game? Ochako was completely confused now. This dinner is just the stage these people have chosen to play their game. Uraraka, status, prestige, and power, it's a game. And to win you need as much as you can get. But they aren't the only players. You, Mrs. Midoriya, and especially Midoriya, are playing the game as well. Just by speaking to Midoriya, these people gain something. It doesn't have to be real, just as long as it's a perceived gain, then they will chalk it up as a win. But, you all can gain something, too. Push and pull, give and take. They want Midoriya for themselves, but at the same time, you need to be working on what you can get from them. Ochako huffed. This sounds more like a battlefield than a game. Things can get pretty vicious. Though you shouldn't have to worry about that. These people are going to do their best to appear friendly, open, and understanding. Even if that's not how they truly feel. They want Midoriya to like them, so they'll be all honey and no vinegar. They won't risk making you upset. Ochako thought about the people who would be there, and how the offers for Eri and herself were added. They were invited to make Izuku happy. These people wanted to meet Izuku because of who he was connected to. And his father probably wanted to use Izuku to make himself look good. I guess as long as I know what I'm walking into, I should be okay. If they're going to be using kid gloves on us, they might not even think we expect the game at all. As long as you know that, you'll be fine, Uraraka. Ochako nodded to herself. If she thought about everything like it was a battle, she would be just fine. She knew how to fight. This was going to be a cakewalk. So, have you thought about how you're going to wear your hair? And what about shoes? And makeup will be essential too. 2. Perfume. Oh, I have so many different ones that I think you'd love. Or not. Ochako ended up staying on the phone with Momo much longer than she originally planned. Coco and Zodiac was a special store because it wasn't really a store. When you walked into the building, you were instantly transported to a realm where money and wealth were on display in every window and on every shelf. On one side, slender and thin mannequins were draped in silks, satins, and velvets. Some clung to the body, while others rippled down to the floor like waves. From the darkest blacks and brightest whites to the most vibrant reds and royal purples. Everything was on display and offered. If you had the money, and could fit into a size 4. In stark contrast, on the building's other side, there was an air of old stature. Pressed slacks, crisp vests and jackets cleaned and worn to perfection. Rows of ties lined shelves and iron shirts hung from racks. Blacks faded into dark gray. Charcoal to stone. And in the monotone of shades of shadow were a splash of navy. Dark as an unlit ocean. Crisp, clean, commanding and unashamedly masculine. Each stitch tailored to turn a boy into a respected and feared man. Izuku and Ochako took one look at their surroundings, and both agreed, the snob levels were off the charts. Ochako looked around, at the people waiting around, watching the customers with sharp judging eyes. At the customers themselves, as they judged the variety of choice before them with skepticism. The eye rolls, and fake smiles. The outright mocking of dresses that could pay her rent for months. The display of wealth was shocking. It was frivolous. To see these people take for granted what she and her family could only dream of having. Rich motherfuckers. The grumble Izuku heard made him blink and turn to his side. You say something, Uraraka? Ochako went rigid and gulped, realizing she had said the quiet part of her little rant out loud. Nope. Not really. Just, a lot of money here, huh? Izuku nodded. Yeah. When father said this was where we'd be going, I looked them up. Zodiac is a premier tailor. And Coco is well known for. Izuku glanced over at a line of mannequins that were all wrapped up in gowns that hugged tightly at the waist and hips, for their runway pieces. Eri hopped around excitedly while holding Inko's hand. Am I going to get a pretty dress? Inko smiled and gave her a pat on the head. That's right. You get to have one too. Can I wear it home? Inko shook her head. I'm afraid not today, Eri. We're getting measured today, so the people can make sure the dresses for us fit. Ochako closed her eyes and bit back a groan, which made Izuku tilt his head. Are you sure you're okay? I thought girls liked getting new CL, Izuku trailed off. Suddenly worried he was about to say something that might get him thrown into another ocean. Again. Ochako laughed. You were saying, Deku? Nothing. I was saying absolutely nothing. Eri, oblivious to the imminent danger Izuku was in, grabbed his hand and pulled him over to the dresses. Look at all the pretty colors. Izuku chuckled and scanned the different dresses. There sure are a lot of options to choose from. Despite his best intentions, and desire not to let his mind wander, Izuku couldn't help but think about Ochako in these dresses. While everything about this dinner had so many negative feelings attached to it, seeing Ochako in a dress had excited him. She was his first real crush. She was gorgeous in the sweats they used to train in. She was gorgeous in her school uniform, and when she wore her hero costume, if Izuku wasn't careful he'd catch himself staring. So, a chance to see Ochako in a pretty dress, that was a chance he was not going to pass up. And there were just so many options. So many different choices Ochako could make, that it made Izuku's head spin just thinking about them all. Deciding that letting his head spin looking at all the mannequins and model billboards probably wasn't a good look for him, Izuku was about to turn away when his eyes landed on one in particular. Oh, wow. The dress hugged the mannequin's slender frame, making each curve on the hip and thigh stand out in stark detail. The tight fabric was almost a second skin with how it clung to the waist and chest, coming up to a point over a single shoulder. The thin strap left the shoulders and arms bare and circled around over the mannequin's back. The dress didn't cover the back at all, and only around the hips. A small zipper that held the dress in place ran up the small of the mannequin's back. As Izuku looked respectfully, he wondered if Ochako would even be able to reach that zipper, and if she might ask him to pull it up for her. Or maybe pull it down. Izuku almost slapped himself then and there. What the heck is wrong with me? I swear, this is Toga's fault. Izuku frowned and mentally shook his head. No. I can't blame her for this. I'm the one having these bad thoughts. How can I be so low to think about Uraraka like this? Because she's beautiful and you're head over heels in love with her, was the immediate response that echoed in Izuku's head. He really wished his heart would just shut up already. Or maybe it was the brain damage he had now. There was no way he'd have let himself think things like this before he scarred up his gray matter. A lie. A huge freaking lie, but one that Izuku had decided to settle on. For now. There was no telling when that safe harbor was going to get swallowed up. Or when Himiko would stab it to death. That did make Izuku chuckle a little. Himiko was doing a great job making him confront his feelings and not hide from them. It was genuinely terrifying how easily she could read him. Walking up beside Izuku, and not noticing how distracted he was, Ochako chuckled to herself. They're pretty, but it's not like any of them are going to fit me. Hearing Ochako snapped Izuku out of his thoughts. Huh? Why not? Ochako eyed one of the mannequins, frowning at just how skinny it was. You have to be a freaking Amidala's rendezvous model to fit into some of these sizes. Ochako discreetly pinched her side and then moved her hand up her arm. Which I am most definitely not. Izuku frowned at the way she seemed to be putting herself down and at the dress sizes. I don't see why you're even bothering to compare yourself, you don't look anything like these models. Izuku didn't notice the wince Ochako had and the frown as she looked down at herself. I mean, this doesn't even look healthy. These models just look so fake, too. Not like you. You're strong, smart, brave, so who cares if you're not a size? Izuku glanced at a tag, 3. Every part of you is something you worked for. I don't care what these billboards and displays say, you're way more beautiful than any of them. These people should be ecstatic for a chance for you to wear one of their dresses. Izuku turned back around to look at Ochako and noticed immediately she was beet red and wide-eyed. Which was strange. Then he saw his mother look like she was close to weeping. She was also texting away on her phone at an alarming pace. What did I say? Eri smiled up at Izuku and teased, you just called Ochako beautiful. While Izuku gaped, Eri started singing, Izuku and Ochako, sitting in a tree. K-I-S-S-I-N-G. First comes low. What did I do? I can't believe I let that slip. I need to say something else. I can't let Uraraka know I think she's. Izuku's thoughts ground to a halt when Ochako, still beet red, had her shocked expression turning bashful and made Izuku's heart drum away for a different reason. Why you think I'm beautiful? There was no power on earth, now or in the future, that could make Izuku take back his words now. Nothing to make him lie at that precise moment, yes. There was also no power on earth, now or in the future, that could make Izuku stay where he was either. Igataga no. Gonna jet me suit. And leaving a particularly loony dust cloud in his wake, Izuku rushed away. Putting as much distance as he could between himself and Ochako, Izuku turned a corner and pressed his back against a wall. Covering his face with his hand, Izuku tried to come to terms with what had just happened. But he was finding it impossible. It was totally normal for a friend to call another friend beautiful, right? When one friend was a boy and the other a girl. Was that normal? Izuku wasn't sure. He needed advice, but this involved potential romantic complications. And he only knew of one person who was an expert in this field. Whipping his phone out, Izuku dialed away, and prayed that she would answer. Yo, Himiko here. I just called Uraraka beautiful, what do we do, phys isn't a big deal right? Please tell me this isn't a big deal. It's a big deal, isn't it, why aren't I saying anything Toga? So, at what point was I supposed to understand a single word that just came out of your mouth? Izuku flushed. Oh. So let's try this again. Yo, Himiko here. I just called Uraraka beautiful. And I don't know what to do. Do? What do you mean, do? What exactly happened? Izuku quickly filled Himiko in on the current situation. Not at all surprised to hear she already knew about the fitting they were going to for the dinner. So after explaining everything, leaving out how he had been caught in a fantasy, he waited for Himiko to offer him some advice. Don't do a fucking thing. Go get your suit. But. Izuku. You were smart enough to not try and take back what you said, and it seems like Ochako wasn't upset at you. Right? Izuku thought back, and recalled how Ochako looked. No, she seemed happy? Then, unless you're willing to go up to her and confess here and now. I am not. Then don't do anything. You don't want this to become a big deal? Don't make it a big deal. It's just that simple. That, Izuku thought, makes a lot of sense. Okay. So, just pretend that nothing happened then. Fuck no, you're not going to do that. Huh? But you said. You said something important, Izuku. You did it fucking twice. You can't just pretend nothing happened. That's not fair to you, and it sure as fuck isn't fair to Ochako. You don't want to make it a big deal, that's fine. But you don't get to ignore it. How do you think Ochako would feel if suddenly she doesn't think you think she's beautiful anymore? Especially when she's getting herself all made up. That would be cruel, and you're not that kind of person. No, he most certainly was not. After a few more words of wisdom, which could be summed up with, man the fuck up and own that you called Ochako beautiful, Himiko offered one last bit of advice. Don't you fucking dare get a pinstripe suit. But All Might wears. Izuku, All Might looks like a complete dweeb in that damned yellow suit. Please, not just for your own sake, but for everyone that'll have to be seen with you, don't do what All Might does. Grumbling, Izuku agreed, and Himiko clutched her heart in relief. Okay, so I'll talk to you later, Izuku. Yeah. Thanks for helping me through that. Bye, Toga. Love you, baby. Izuku's sputter made Himiko burst out laughing. Sometimes, the low-hanging fruit was just too tempting to pass up. Reaching over, Himiko was about to put her phone away when it started beeping with a text. Oh. Uraraka, Deku called M3 beautiful. 1. Himiko pressed the phone against her forehead. I swear to God, these two are going to drive me insane. Why is Ochako flying away? Eri asked as she craned her neck to keep an eye on Ochako, who was twirling in the air as she desperately typed away at her phone. Inko shook her head. Because teenagers are very weird and apparently not capable of just saying how they feel anymore. Saying how they feel? Inko laughed. You'll learn when you're older, Eri. Eri looked away and turned to Inko. Were you ever like Ochako? Inko blinked, looked back up at Ochako so Eri couldn't see her face, and despite herself and how things turned out, grinned a little wickedly. Oh no, dear. I wasn't one to wait around and be silent. And I wasn't afraid to take what I wanted either, back then. That memory brought a fresh blush to Inko's face before she shook her head and reached out her hand. Ochako, hands and phone pressed against her face, gave a sudden startled leap when she felt her shoe getting tugged on. Peeking from between her fingers, Ochako saw that she had let herself float up pretty high while texting with Himiko, and now Inko was pulling her back down with her quirk. Oh, well, this is humiliating. Feet back on solid ground, Ochako quickly released herself from the effects of her quirk and fidgeted under the gaze of an amused, and perhaps a little exasperated, Inko. Are you done? We are here for a reason, you know. Ochako hurriedly nodded her head and frantically tapped away at her phone before putting it away. Ready, ma'am. Putting a comforting arm around Ochako, Inko led the three of them towards the dress store. Just before they went in, a sliver of mischievousness sparked inside of Inko. Maybe after a year of waiting, she was getting a little impatient, or maybe she really wanted to win that bet, but she leaned over and whispered so that Eri couldn't hear. It was nice, though, wasn't it? Hearing Izuku say you were beautiful. Ochako's cheeks burned, but she nodded all the same. Stepping inside the dress store, Ochako felt eyes on her. She also swore she heard a scoff. So she scanned the room and saw a couple of people looking their way. They were snickering at each other, and one who didn't know that Ochako could see her, used her hands to outline her body as if she was overweight. Mocking Inko. Oh, that bitch is dead. Ochako wasn't able to take a step their way though as Inko pushed her along. Let's go to the front desk and see if we can find an attendee. Hopefully, they have Detnerat's appointment for us. Sure enough, at the desk a tall, slender woman eyed the three of them as they approached. Yes? Can I help you? Eri bounced on her feet. We're here to get dresses. Ah, the tall woman raised an eyebrow. Is that so? Her eyes swerved over Eri quickly enough, paused at Ochako, then lingered on Inko with a small frown. While we do have an excellent selection, our styles on hand may not be the best choices for you. Ochako almost blew her top right then and there, but Inko just smiled. Oh, I'm well aware I wasn't going to be buying anything off the rack. But that's why Detnerat scheduled this time for us so that your excellent staff would be able to get our measurements and to tailor your beautiful dresses for us. An establishment of your reputation must have talented seamstresses who would be able to help create something fabulous for the three of us. The woman blinked. She typed quickly on her computer and looked back at the three. Detnerat? Inko nodded. Mrs. Midoriya? That's right. And like a switch had been flipped, the woman's whole demeanor changed from judgmental to full-on saleswoman. Yes, of course. We've been expecting you. Ladies, the woman snapped her fingers at the two gossiping women, our important appointment is here. When the two women went rigid, Ochako got a good look at them and saw that they had name badges pinned to themselves. The saleswoman got up. Please, right this way, we have set aside some private rooms for you. While I go see to our tailoresses, if you would, follow my associates. She then addressed the two. They will lead you to your rooms. And start pulling some selections immediately. Both women nodded. Inko took hold of Eri's hand. You'll come with me, alright? Uraraka, you'll be fine on your own. Ochako looked over at the women she'd seen mocking Inko and started walking over to the one that had started it. Oh, I'll be fine. Stepping into the small room, Ochako was only vaguely aware of her surroundings. The room was lined with hanger racks and sewing desks. A large triple dressing mirror stood against a wall with a small standing stool in the center. The attendee bowed and motioned towards a rack. If you don't mind, you can hang your clothes there and step up on the stool. Ochako nodded, making sure her cold eyes stayed on the woman just a little longer than necessary. She almost smirked when she saw the woman fidget. Ochako slipped out of her shoes, then removed her loose shirt and shorts, leaving her in a pair of leggings and a tight tank top that left her shoulders and arms bare and rode up enough that her midriff was exposed. Ochako swore she heard the woman gulp. I'm in the hero course at UA, Ochako stated simply as she stepped up on the stool. These, Ochako tensed her arms, making the muscles much more pronounced, won't be an issue, will they? H-hero course? There was a soft knock at the door before another attendee, one that Ochako hadn't seen, came in, wheeling a large rack of dresses. She was followed by an older woman with gray hair, who had a measuring tape rolled up in her hand and an apron lined with pins, notepads, and all kinds of measuring tools. My, oh my, aren't you a sturdy young woman, the old woman said with a chuckle as she looked Ochako over. Definitely going to have to make some additions to the shoulders and the hips for sure. And those arms, oof. The younger attendee went stiff as she stopped pushing the rack. Grandmother. You mustn't say that. Oh, you hush and get those dresses ready for us. The young attendee shook her head. I apologize for my grandmother. She's an excellent tailoress, but she does not have a filter on her at all. The young woman trailed off as she got a good look of Ochako. Her eyes went wide as recognition set in. Oh my gosh! I know you! She tapped the other attendee, who looked confused, on the shoulder. Don't you remember? She was at the sports festival we watched. The other attendee blinked rapidly before turning a little pale. She was? I was, Ochako confirmed. Yeah. She was the one that had that match against that shape-shifting blood girl. The one that was on the news a few weeks ago. She turned into some kind of shark person and then she, the young attendee motioned at Ochako, ripped her jaw off. The attendee turned white and started to shake. Then beat her opponent with it. Now the attendee was green. She looked at Ochako, who glared back at her and, with a quick motion of her hands, copied the movement she had done before when she'd looked at Inko. The attendee turned on her heel and ran out of the room. The old tailoress shook her head. Damn fool. If she needed to take a crap, she should have done it during her break. Grandmother. Ochako just rolled her eyes at the escaping woman. Why was it so hard for people to just give others some basic respect? But, she supposed, if she couldn't get that, she could settle for a little fear. The old woman pulled out her tape and started taking measurements. Stand up straight. Don't want to get something wrong and have you twist and tear a seam in the middle of your big event. Oh, good, because that's something I wanted to worry could happen, Ochako grumbled silently to herself. Poke. Ow. Ochako jumped as a pin pricked her behind. If you're going to say something, speak from your chest. I can't stand wishy-washy brats, the old tailoress said with a huff. And don't go grumbling about tearing anything. That's why I'm here and I'm damned good at my job, thank you very much. Now stop jumping around and hold still. You pricked me. And I expected you to have bent the pin, but it looks like you still have some soft cushioning around the back. Ochako flushed while the granddaughter covered her face in utter horror. Grandmother. The tailoress shook her finger at her. Oh, you hush and start pulling out some dresses for her to look at. And you, stand up straight. Ochako glowered at the old woman, who didn't give a damn at all. Oh, stop pouting. If you're going to be a hero, you should be able to handle a little prick. If I'm going to have to put up with this, maybe I should have gone and got measured for a suit with Deku, Ochako said with a huff. That got a sharp laugh from the old tailoress. Oh yes, nothing gets a young man's blood pumping like a woman in a silly suit. Ochako rolled her eyes as the woman wrapped the tape measure around her chest. I'm going to a fancy dinner. I want to be respectable. Not looking to get anyone's blood pumping. And suits are totally a respectable thing for a woman to wear these days. Oh, you're full of it. I saw you with that boy. Making doe eyes at each other and acting like complete fools. One way or another, he's the reason you're going to this dinner, I bet. Kimo, the old woman completely ignored Ochako, grabbed that little black number. With the sash around the waist. Yes, Grandma Yuka, wait, this one? The cocktail dress? Kimo pulled a dress off the rack, and Ochako almost swallowed her tongue. The dress was small, barely the length of a long t-shirt. And it was form-fitting. Even on a hanger, Ochako could tell that dress was going to smother her. And again, it was short. No thank you. Ochako shook her head. Nothing like that, please. God, that wouldn't cover my legs at all. It'd barely cover my ass. Kimo nodded and quickly put the dress back, and moved a few other dresses like it to the side. What exactly is this dinner? Private, formal, or? It's a dinner with the CEO, my friends, Ochako almost choked on the next word, father works for. He invited them, and an offer was extended to me. Apparently, some other important people will be there. Kimo nodded, and began moving more dresses around. Ochako looked back at her reflection and huffed, getting a good look at herself in the full-bodied mirrors that showed her off at multiple angles. So, respectable. I want to look respectable and professional. Yeah, that should be fine. Yuka wrapped the tape around her hips. Don't pretend you give a damn about some snobby rich pricks. I can hear it in your voice. Ochako glanced over. Huh? The old woman shook her head. If you pretend what you want while picking your dress, you're going to hate it. And I'm too old to be wasting my time fitting a young woman that doesn't have her head on straight. Kimo pulled out a very professional-looking dress. It was sleek and modern. Perfect for rubbing elbows with the elites. She fucking hated it. I want to be there for my friend. I don't think this will be an easy dinner for them. And it almost felt selfish to add this last part, but she did anyway. I want my friend to think I look good too. And I want to look good too. I don't get many chances to wear something pretty. Like at all. Yuka took her tape and ran it up Ochako's arms, tapping the muscle as she took another measurement. Kimo grabbed the one at the end. The one with the lace around the neckline. Pleated top. And Yuka lifted Ochako's arms up. Go and grab some blazer tops. I'm feeling creative. Kimo quickly put the dress her grandmother had suggested on a separate hanger and left the room. Wanna hide my arms, huh? Ochako asked. She felt her anxiety over her fit form coming back. A jacket might also hide the fact she was on the wide side too. Not on your life. We're going to accentuate them with some lace. Unless you want to hide them? Did she? Could she look good in a dress if those parts of herself were on display? Ochako looked at the dress, then looked back at her reflection. As she did, Izuku's words rang softly in her ears, whispering back from her heart. Hearing them again, Ochako looked at herself and smiled. Deku's right. I did work for this. I'm going to be a hero, and I worked to get what I have. And what I have, he thinks it's beautiful. Ochako couldn't hide the flush that spread over her cheeks as she remembered Izuku's compliment. How warm it had made her feel. Absently, Ochako ran a finger over her arms, down her stomach and across her thigh. She had power in her body. All Might and Gunhead had started her down this path. Miruko had redefined it. And it's not like Miruko didn't have a fucking killer body. The soft throb from the earlier prick made Ochako's hand travel over her hips and then her backside. Despite all her training, she still had her baby fat from junior high there. Not like that's a bad thing. If I'm soft in the right spot, I'm perfect for cuddling. She was happy with that, and herself. Then her heart decided to be a bitch and added, those soft spots are also perfect for Deku to hold on to. Or for some added cushion. Her heart sounded a lot like Himiko. The blush on Ochako's face spread over her ears and down her neck. You shut the fuck up. Her heart just mocked her. Oh, stop complaining. At least you'll have some happy dreams tonight. Ochako really wished she wasn't excited by that thought. A soft chuckle made Ochako look down at the old tailoress. Huh? Oh, nothing. Just that youth is wasted on the young. Been a long while since I looked that stupid thinking about someone. Ochako gulped. She hadn't been that obvious, had she? Oh yes, you were, dear. Old women were scary, Ochako decided then and there. They just knew things they shouldn't. That comes from years of experience. Now Ochako was freaking out. The old woman laughed and went back to work. Deciding it was more fun to not tell Ochako she had an empathy quirk. Now, what about colors? Maybe something green? When Kimo came back, she questioned why their client was floating up on the ceiling. After collecting his thoughts and calming himself down, Izuku walked into the men's suits section of the building. Almost immediately, he was hit with a strange combo of smells. The first was bitter and almost chemical. Vaguely, Izuku recalled once or twice when he was younger and playing hide and seek in the Bakugou household and he had hidden in the closet. The same smell had been there too. Mothballs. A very old-fashioned smell. The other smell was surprisingly even stronger, to the point it was almost overpowering and made the room hard to breathe in. Smoke. Rich and heavy tobacco smoke. This was an old place where old money was spent. A man from behind the counter looked Izuku over as he stepped into the store, eyeing him carefully. "Can I help you?" "Oh, yes. I'm here to get measured for a suit?" "Mr. Midoriya?" "Yes, that's me." "Excellent, our tailors are ready for you now." "Right this way." "It's a good thing I saw you on the television, or else I wouldn't have been prepared. A giovanato like you really needs to wear clothes less baggy. Am I right, fellas?" "Oh, definitely." "Oh sure, kid, you're doing yourself a huge disservice. All you need are some skinny jeans and white t-shirts that re a size too small. Walk around a mall, and in less than 30 minutes, your phone is going to be full of numbers." Izuku stammered and muttered to himself at the utter impossibility of what these men were saying. "See, come on. I'm not that. Kid, you muscles have muscles. Here, make a muscle." One of the men who was picking out shirts walked over to Izuku and took his arm to flex it, but he was smacked away by the tailor. Hey, I'm taking measurements here. Go to your job and pick out a damn shirt already. Yeah, you take too damn long with your measurements. I'd have had it done by now. Yeah, and afterwards when the kid gets his suit and the cuffs are too damn long, you'll be telling him they'll ride up with wear. Like a damned sitcom numbskull. Kids got too much money to not get perfection, and I'm the only one here that can do it. A few waved hands from the other men in the room didn't bother the tailor at all. And hey, while he's trying not to embarrass himself by picking out another crap shirt, you knuckleheads do your jobs and get another ensemble put together. And nothing loose. Let's go with my gut this time and pick out something slim. Look, even the kid knows I'm right. Izuku gulped and stayed silent, still trying to wrap his head around the flurry of events that had transpired. First, while the main lobby of the store had been stuffy, the back changing rooms were like a whole different world. The tailors and assistants, who all seemed to be of Italian descent if their accents were anything to go on, had instantly recognized Izuku from his win at the sports festival. So, before any measuring could be done, they had all but demanded that he regale them with his experiences during his matches, which had been fun. About halfway through, he was finally told that they needed to get to work, so he stripped down to his undershirt, boxers and socks and got up on the stool. In retrospect, it had probably been a mistake to wear the All Might brand boxers and matching socks. Now he was left standing on a small stool while one man took all his measurements and the others mixed and matched different suit parts to get his outfit together. Izuku had spotted a very nice maroon pinstripe suit with a bow tie, but Himiko's warning about avoiding trying to mimic All Might's look was still fresh in his mind. Plus, he got the feeling that if he ignored her advice, she would bite him. And not in a pleasant way. "Hey, maybe we should finally decide on a color before we go looting around," one of the men said as he held up a few pants. "We given the kid a green suit? What, are you nuts? We're here to make this kid look like a proper made man. Not some off-the-rack nerd. Black, a good white shirt. Simple, but clean. You hear that, Luigi?" Yeah. I do like green though," Izuku mumbled. The tailor shook his head. "Kid, you don't just want to think I look good in a suit. You want others to think you look good, too. Like say, certain young ladies." Izuku gulped. "Ladies like that floaty auburn you came in with." Izuku whirled around. What? You are Uraraka is just a friend. Is that right? And do you make it a habit of making your friends go all blushy and mushy like that? Be blushy and mushy? One of the assistants walked over to lay out some ties and laughed. Hey, the kid's a smooth operator and doesn't even know it yet. Smoke started puffing out of Izuku's mouth. SSS smooth? A round of raunchy laughter came from the group and made Izuku turn red. He'll have her eating out of his hand once he figures it out. Eating out of his hand, he'll have her on her. The tailor turned and chucked a pen at the youngest assistant, bouncing it off his head. Oi! Idiota! Watch your damned mouth. I've told you about that murder. Caso di Stronzo. Hey, I didn't say nothin'. The tailor pointed for him to get back to work. And you're not gonna say nothing. Got it? Show some respect here. While the young assistant stepped away, another came up with some shirts and suit jackets. The tailor looked them over before grabbing a skinny fit shirt with a sharp collar and putting it on Izuku. Not a bad fit, just a little loose around the chest. We can take that in no problem. Here, give me your arm, I see the perfect suit for you. Hey, hand me that 2-button piece. Getting handed the black slim jacket, he slid it onto Izuku. Alright, button up that top button and stand up straight. Let's see how this works. While Izuku stood still, the tailor went to work with his chalk, marking up the sleeves and sides of the jacket. Not too bad. Just got to get this snug on your frame and I think we'll have our start for you. Izuku smirked at his reflection. So, I'm going to look pretty good, then? Oh, you're gonna knock them dead, kid. Despite himself, Izuku couldn't help but wonder if Ochako would think he looked good too. Then the door to the room opened. Your son is right this way, madam. I'm sure by now he's just finishing up his Deku? Izuku turned, wide-eyed as Inko and Eri stopped in the doorway, with Inko quickly covering Eri's eyes. Besides them, Ochako had walked into the room, having been led by the man from the store's lobby. Oh. It seems I was wrong. Inko quickly turned herself and Eri away while Ochako was left, frozen in place. Eyes wide as she took in the sight before her. Izuku. Without any pants on. You are dash. While Izuku's hard drive crashed into a glitchy blue screen mess, Ochako let her eyes go down from Izuku's stunned face, all the way down to his lower half, which only had boxers and socks for cover. Before Ochako could get caught staring at the package that had just been gifted to her, Inko reached in and yanked the girl out of the room from the doorway. Izuku, I'm so sorry. The tailor shooed them all out. Damned fool. When the door is closed, you knock. The front-end associate bowed and quickly closed the door, leaving some in the group to start laughing. What did I tell you, eating out of the palm of his hand? Too bad she wasn't looking at the jacket you picked out. She was too busy eyeing up the kids. Thunk! The tailor's notepad bounced off the young associate. Back to work, now. Let's get this poor kid some pants. Himiko blinked at the new text she'd gotten. It took her a few rereads before she was able to finally comprehend it. O.Uraraka, D1KU. O.Uraraka, N0PNTS. O.Uraraka, D3Ku N0P at NT5. I swear to God, this isn't fucking fair. Fuck you, Ochako. You lucky bitch. The sun was setting, and the tall buildings at ground beta cast dark shadows over the training ground. Scattered amongst the streets were multiple ectoplasm clones, the full 36 since he had been in a very good mood today, getting to enjoy a lunch at his favorite restaurant. At least, there had been 36 clones. One by one, as a clone walked through a shadow of a building, they simply never came back out into the sunlight. There was never a sound to alarm anyone that anything had happened. They simply vanished. Now there were only 2 clones left. Snicked. One clone laughed. With his head suddenly yanked back, the penultimate clone only saw the briefest flash of metal from twin sharpened blades before they slashed across his throat and he dissolved into a viscous white goo. The last clone now stood in the middle of an intersection. The broad street was perhaps the last place that wasn't covered in shadows and still had the waning sun's red light shining on it. The clone turned his head constantly, trying to peer into the shadows, to see just where the attack he knew was coming was going to come fro. Thunk! A knife twirled end over end until the large combat knife embedded itself into the side of his skull, and the last clone hit the ground with a wet plop, like a bursting water balloon. For the next few seconds, the training ground was completely silent, so quiet that you would now think it was empty of all life, until shoes, that didn't need to be quiet anymore, created the echo of skipping footsteps. Himiko emerged from the black shadows like a wraith from the mist. Dressed in her UA sweats, and wearing bandoliers that held all her knives and daggers alongside a set of her bladed bracers, Himiko skipped down the street with a proud smile as she made her way to the gooey mess in the center of the street to retrieve her knife. Humming a happy tune as she did. A crackle of static broke through the training ground's peaceful calm. An excellent display, Toga. A little shadow and you become a truly frightful predator. Himiko rolled her eye at Principal Nizu's compliment, but didn't lose her smile. This means I'm cleared, right? No more tests to see if this, she tapped her eye patch, is holding me back? It was ectoplasm that spoke up next. At no point was I able to see or hear you coming through my clones. Once one was down, you were already gone before I could send some to that area. Against a group that doesn't have a hive mind like I do with my quirk, no one would know you were even there. On top of that, you met the requirement that at least half of your takedowns were made at a distance requiring you to throw your knives. 18 for 18 perfect headshots. With pride, Nizu concluded, I am confident that you are back to 100%. Slipping out of her sweats and gear, Himiko quickly threw on some loose shorts and a shirt and made a beeline for the locker room's exit. With this formality out of the way, since she had known for over weeks that she was back to her normal self, Himiko was ready to get back to more important things. Like planning her revenge against Ochako. Getting the full story behind the texts later had only infuriated her even more. The fact that Ochako had been in a situation where she had walked in on Izuku in the middle of getting fitted for a suit with his pants off, and that she hadn't been there as well, was unforgivable. She also didn't buy the lie that Ochako hadn't seen anything worth sharing in detail. Aside from the fact that Izuku wore All Might branded boxer briefs, which was not a surprise. Didn't see anything, my ass. Boxer briefs give you a damned good idea what's under the wrapping. Of course Himiko had a basic idea. During the time she'd been transformed into Izuku during the sports festival, there had been certain things she had noticed. Then of course there were the times alone in her room when she'd chosen to just exist as Izuku for a little while. Having access to Izuku and Ochako's blood came with so many bonuses besides quenching her thirst. In the mirror she'd smile like he did, mutter like him and get bashful like whenever he was teased by her or, when he thought no one was looking, he was looking at Ochako. She had spent a lot of time as Izuku and had a pretty good idea just what he was like. Not that she'd taken a peek. There was a simple rule she had imposed when she started to exist as Izuku. It also applied to Ochako, as she also loved just being her. Clothes stayed on. The moment they had trusted her with their blood, something had changed. Something had been forged between them and she was not going to cheapen it for a peek. Fortunately, in Ochako's case she was now forever grateful that the girls in 1A shared a locker room. And in Izuku's case, there was always the chance that after a hard day's training at school, she'd get to see him with his clothes in various stages of being burned off or soaking wet. Giving her wonderful peeks at what was underneath. Himiko blinked a few times and a huge blush spread over her face. Now she was imagining Ochako changing into her tight hero costume on top of thinking about what Ochako had seen in that fitting room. Greyat. Now I'm vengeful and horny. Damn you Ochako, why you gotta get me all excited now when I'm planning your downfall? Now Himiko needed to decide what she was going to spend her night doing. Opening the locker room door, she came to a grumbling stop when she saw Midnight waiting for her. Oh fuck. Himiko blinked, turned on her heel and immediately started down the hallway. Unfortunately, Midnight was right at her side. There was only one reason Midnight would be here, and Himiko really didn't want to talk about the subject. A fact that hadn't changed at all since she had heard the news weeks ago. Please be about something else. Maybe they know about some rule I broke. I'd take that over. Toga, Midnight began softly. It was a kind and understanding tone. And Himiko hated it. because it meant this was going to be over the subject she didn't want to talk about. Fuck. A part of her had hoped that Midnight had given up and was done trying to talk to her about this. It had been a week since her last attempt, and the therapy sessions between then and now had actually been reasonably pleasant. But that damn tone, and the look of understanding in Midnight's eyes, made it clear the subject was not dead. Not like the person was. I told you. Not talking about it. You need to talk, Toga. Keeping this locked inside isn't healthy. You know this. After all this time, you know more than anyone that hiding your feelings is not the answer. Himiko almost stopped walking. This was a new tactic, playing up her own trauma of hiding parts of herself to make her talk openly. She hated when Midnight got good at her job. She was getting much better at making Himiko open up. Was finding all the right ways, hitting the right nerves. Or maybe Himiko was just not as guarded around her as she once was. Himiko thought that idea was disgusting. It's not like she was starting to like the constant pain in the ass. Even if she was starting to be right more often than she'd like to admit. There's nothing to talk about. Toga, it's perfectly reasonable to feel some responsibility over what happened to Saito and... Himiko whirled around. I don't feel responsible. Toga. Himiko threw her hands up in the air. He's dead. Does it suck? You bet it does. I hate that this is how it ended for him and his family. And you better believe when I see Shigaraki again, I'm cutting his damn throat and watching him choke on his own blood. Fuck the no-killing bullshit you want me to follow. But at the end of the day, I'm not responsible for Sato's choices. You don't think you're responsible? Himiko shook her head. No. I don't. At the end of the day, we're only responsible for ourselves and the choices we make. And we either live through them, or we don't. When Himiko turned back to look at Midnight, she saw the hero frowning at her. Her answer was not sitting right with Midnight at all. I'm not going to cry and weep. And I'm not holding Saito to any other standard than the same one I hold myself to. The same rules that apply to him also apply to me. Rules? My parents fucked me up, but I still made my choices after. I have never tried to shift the blame, the responsibility, to anyone else. That's always been you guys. You and the heroes, Izuku too. My parents abused me. Mr. Stain manipulated me. It's all bullshit. I survived by becoming what I am. I worked to become a killer. My choice. My responsibility. It's the same with Saito. I fucked him up and you heroes fucking tried to blackmail him, but it was his choice to come here. It was his choice to pull that gun. His choice. His responsibility. Midnight wasn't sure what to say to that. It was a harsh stance to take. Cruel and cold. But Himiko was right about one thing, it was the same standard she held herself to. The only difference was that Saito hadn't had a chance to learn how to survive. What about his parents? Who's responsible for what happened to them? In this whole mess, they're people that hadn't made a choice, that never got a chance to make one. Himiko's eye narrowed, and a sneer crossed her lips, but she didn't say anything. Midnight blinked at the silence. Toga? Himiko turned back around and doubled her pace down the hall. Toga? Toga? There's a fucking reason why I'm going to be the one to kill Shigaraki. Himiko was pulling away, and Midnight could tell she had gotten just about all she was going to get out of her. There was still one last question to ask. Have you still not talked with Midoriya or Uraraka? Any of your friends? I'm sure they'd want to help you through this. You know you can talk to them too. There was a change in Himiko's tone now. Like she found the idea too absurd to take seriously. What, and clue Izuku in on the fact that Shigaraki is so focused on getting at him that he seems to be killing anyone that comes close to? Fuck that. Izuku doesn't need to be bothered with any of this. He has too much on his plate already. All he'll know is that Saito is taken care of. That the crazy gun-wielding bastard is never going to be an issue again. Something about that thought, though, made Himiko pause in her tracks. Midnight watched Himiko closely and was taken aback when her face changed. All he'll know. When Himiko turned the corner and left Midnight in the hall, all the hero could think was just how sad Himiko suddenly looked. Izuku stood nervously in the entrance hall of Ochako's apartment. With the dinner so close, it had been his responsibility to grab Ochako for the train right up to Daika City. Glancing down at his phone, Izuku frowned at the time. It sure was taking Ochako a long time to get ready. Not that he'd ever say that. He liked not being thrown into orbit. Still, how long did it take to put on a dress? Deku. Izuku looked up when his name was called from inside Ochako's room. Yeah? Could you come in here, please? Oh. Okay, sure. Pocketing his phone, Izuku walked over to the door and was about to open it before he chuckled and asked, "Wait, you're decent, right?" Deku. I need you. Don't keep me waiting. Izuku felt his breath catch in his throat. The way Ochako had moaned his name and then the sultry finish. Was it Ochako in that room or Midnight? She also hadn't answered his question. This was a dangerous situation that Izuku was in. Because if he opened this door and Ochako wasn't decent, he wasn't sure he'd be able to forgive himself for. Deku. Please. Izuku quickly opened the door. Walking into the dimly lit room, Izuku saw Ochako with her back facing him and he gulped. The bright pink dress was the exact same one he had noticed back at the clothing store, leaving Ochako's shoulders, arms, and back bare. The pink fabric clung to her hips, making her curves all the more inviting. Izuku took in the sight of Ochako's exposed skin and felt his mouth go dry. Deku. Help. Izuku's eyes traveled down Ochako's back, watching her shoulder blades flex slightly as she reached behind herself and pointed to the small of her back. The zipper was half done up, just under her hip line. Oh. Oh, right. Trying his best not to stumble over his own feet, Izuku rushed over so he was right behind Ochako. Here, let me. Oh, once he was behind her, Ochako arched her back and pushed her hips back towards him, making the dress come a little loose around them and making the zipper drop. It only opened a little, but it was enough to expose a peak of black lace that was a stark contrast against Ochako's pale skin. Izuku stared, mesmerized by the black lace that was peeking out at him from under the dress. When he realized just what he was looking at, Izuku suddenly didn't think wearing such slim dress pants was such a good idea. Ochako was wearing black lace panties, and he was looking at the top of the waistband. Ochako swayed her hips again, and Izuku whined in the back of his throat. Oh, 1 second. I'll get the zipper. Pinching the small piece of metal between his thumb and middle finger, Izuku paused before tugging it up. He didn't want that black lace to disappear. Uncurling his pointer finger, he ran it over the edge of the soft material, where lace and skin met in a dramatic line of soft and supple. The erotic touch lit his finger on fire, sending a bolt of desire running up his arm and spreading throughout his whole body. Izuku whined and whimpered. Ochako gyrated her hips, making them dance to a silent tune. Deku. Please hurry. Izuku swallowed a groan at the way Ochako moved. Her hips swayed and her behind danced so sweetly in front of him. His body roared at him to cup the marvel this goddess was presenting to him, drop to his knees and worship. But she had called him in for a reason. Right. Zipper. Sorry, let me just pull this up and... Ochako whimpered and backed up, pushing herself back until she was pressed against Izuku. Her hips pressed against his. She then bent over and put her hands on her bed. She rocked her hips side to side, and Izuku latched onto her waist to steady himself with his free hand. Instincts took over and Izuku pressed against Ochako as she grinded against him. Up and down. Back and forth. Around and around in small agonizing circles. Izuku was panting, gasping for air as he tried to keep himself from doing something. He tried to keep himself calm. Deku. The heat and want in Ochako's voice made Izuku shudder. Then he looked at her face. Raw passion and lust blazed in her eyes. Her face burned with so much desire. She licked her lips and finished with a few words that dripped with sex. I don't want you to zip me up. Izuku yanked the zipper down, then leaned forward to ring, 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 ring. The ringing of his phone pulled Izuku out of his pleasant dream, and for a few moments, mind still clouded with sleep and hormones, Izuku was left wondering why the hips he had been holding were now his bunched-up blanket and the neck he had been kissing was his pillow. Ring. 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 The next series of rings from his phone woke Izuku up fully, and it was by a small miracle that he didn't immediately scream in embarrassment as he pushed the cover away and spat out his pillow. A miracle, and the rational part of his brain reminding him he shared a room with Eri and that he didn't want to wake her up. Oh God, I was, and then Uraraka, and when she started, oh, you stupid idiot, Izuku hissed to himself. Horrified that his stupid ideas of love were now creeping into his dreams. This was Himiko's fault. She was becoming a bad influence on him and encouraging his damned heart to think up ideas. Well, more frequent and intense ideas. It wasn't like he hadn't dreamed of Ochako before. Things were just more hot now. Izuku groaned and covered his face with an arm. I did not just think that it was hot. Izuku's uncomfortable shorts made it crystal clear that he did indeed think the dream had been hot. Ring. 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 The next set of rings finally pulled Izuku from his thoughts and got him to act. Rolling over, Izuku squinted at the screen to see who was calling him. Toga? Izuku blinked at the name before concluding, God was real and he hated him, because there was no way Himiko was calling him at this exact moment by chance. There was just no way. Izuku could just let the call go to voicemail. Leave that landmine until tomorrow morning, and maybe, if he got back to sleep fast enough, he could get back to sucking on Ochako's neck and peeling her out of that dress. Crack! A prompt punch to the head dispelled that idea, and Izuku answered his phone, because honestly Himiko wouldn't be calling at this hour for no reason. Hell, his voice squeaked pitifully. Hello? For a few seconds after answering his phone, Izuku didn't hear an answer. When the silence continued, he repeated, hello? Toga? Thinking that maybe the call was an accident, he was about to hang up when Himiko finally spoke up. Hey, so do you want to come over and fuck me? The question went in one ear, thoroughly wrecked Izuku's brain like a round of buckshot, and then exited out the other ear. After the dream he had just had, hearing that left Izuku in a stupor. Wah 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 wah. Is that a no, or? Izuku pulled the phone away from his ear, and hissed when he pinched himself, confirming this wasn't some dream within a dream thing, then embarrassingly took his pillow and covered his lap. Because even if the call was voice only and there was no way Himiko could know what he had just been dreaming about, somehow she knew. Izuku was convinced she somehow knew. Tog. Izuku winced at his cracking voice. Toga. It's Izuku quickly checked his clock and lowered his voice so as not to wake Eri. It's 4 a.m. So, no coming over? Toga. Izuku sighed, if you want to tease me, please don't do it so late, or so early. Sorry, I guess I needed a laugh. And it's a genuine offer, you know. I can tell you where to sneak in to get past cameras, and midnight has plenty of protection here for. Izuku sucked in a breath, and hurriedly hissed out, don't need to know that. Don't need to know any of that. Himiko chuckled. You do know that heroes fuck, right? Izuku rubbed his brow. I'm hanging up now. You got the laugh you needed. So I'm going back to bed. Izuku pulled the phone away from his ear, but stopped. And for a quick second thought about what Himiko had said, between the teasing. He put the phone back and, in a much calmer voice, asked, why did you need a laugh, Toga? The silence was concerning. Himiko wasn't one for being quiet. With the exception of her sneaking around, of course. Toga? Sato's dead. Izuku blinked. Saito? The boy that had confronted them at UA weeks ago. The one that had attacked him. He was dead? When? How? Toga, are you okay? Did he attack you? Come back to the school? He's been dead for a while, Izuku. Got killed a couple of days after the incident. Oh my god. It was Shigaraki. He got Saito and his parents. Izuku felt dizzy as he tried to think why Tamura would want to kill them. It made no sense. Izuku. Look, I was told about this a while ago. Maybe a day or so after Nizu found out. And I was the one that pushed for trying to keep you, Ochako, and the rest of the class from knowing. If you saw it on the news, well, not much I can do there, though it seems like the Hero Public Safety Commission has been doing a pretty good job keeping it on the down low, but why? Not really sure. Maybe because bringing it up would bring up Shigaraki. Maybe I just wanted everyone to forget about Saito and move on. Maybe I just didn't want you to know, and the best way was to keep quiet about it with everyone. Me? Because damn it, you have other shit you need to worry about than the bullshit around me. You're trying to protect me? Izuku heard a grumble and some mumbled unflattering words leaked through before Himiko calmed herself. More like trying not to distract you. Because let's face it, your damn heart is too big for your own good. If you knew about this, you'd be over here again, checking up on me. Of course I would. See? And then I'd tell you the same thing I told Midnight. I'm fine. Saito is responsible for his own actions. Blah blah blah. And then we go back and forth over the subject, and it's just a big waste of time. Then why did you tell me? Because, Himiko paused and chewed on her words. You matter to me. I love you, after all, and what you think matters to me too, to an extent. And how you view Saito matters to me. I don't want the only thoughts you have about him to be from that day. I'd rather you know more about him. What I'm saying is, what I'm asking, Himiko trailed off, not sure how to say what she wanted to say. Toga, Izuku cut in softly. Tell me about Saito. Himiko breathed and whispered, thank you, Izuku. So Himiko talked and Izuku listened. Listened as Himiko talked about who Saito was. Listened to stories of a boy with messy black hair who wasn't afraid to pick a fight against bullies and who was kind to his classmates. A stark contrast to the pale-haired and enraged person Izuku had met. That they were the same person was hard to fathom, but in the end, how a person deals with hardships and pain can change someone in an instant. Toga. Yeah? Are you okay? Himiko sighed. I'm alright. We're all responsible for our own actions, Izuku. I've never tried to shift the blame for what I've done. I'm not going to take responsibility for what Saito did. Am I sad this is how things ended? Fuck yeah, I'm sad. Angry too. But there's nothing I can do about it right now. It's fucked up, but life in general is fucked up. Izuku supposed that it fit with how Himiko viewed the world. She never did accept his reasoning for why she had done the things she had done. She had simply done them, end of story. It made sense she would apply that logic to other people. Izuku wasn't sure he agreed with that kind of logic, since it clashed with how he thought a hero was responsible for others, but he couldn't call it wrong either. Honestly, it was not the right hour of the night/morning to try and think about it. It especially wasn't a conversation to have over the phone in hushed whispers so that he didn't wake up Eri. Hey Izuku, I think I'm going to go back to bed. I got what I needed to off my chest. Kinda ready to just move on now. Yeah. Okay. That's fine, Toga. I'm glad I could help. Himiko yawned on the other end of the call. Well, you have a good night, Izuku. I'll let you get back to your dreams of Ochako all dressed up, he. Izuku's eyes bulged and he instinctually pressed down on the pillow in his lap. He chirped out a strangled gasp. How? How did you? I mean, you did call me all flustered because you called her beautiful. It's not that hard to put two and two together, Izuku. All those pretty dresses and a knockout like Ochako trying them on. I know I'd be having some fun dreams after. Wait. Something in Himiko's voice changed, taking a more sultry tone as something clicked. Izuku? I was just teasing you, but were you dreaming of Ochako? Izuku whined. What was she wearing? Izuku whimpered. Or what was she not wearing? Ochako's exposed nape, her bare back and shoulders. That damn zipper, running down the small of Ochako's back, and the way the soft fabric clung to her hips even as she swayed them around. That black lace. The taste of her skin on his lips, and tongue. The scene that had faded from Izuku's mind now returned in sharp clarity. He gasped and bit back a low moan. Wah! Hurriedly, Izuku whispered out, "GGGG good night, Toga." And hung up. Rolling himself up in his blankets, Izuku fought to calm down and to go to sleep. On the other end of the line, Himiko was left feeling knocked off balance. She had just heard the most delicious sound she had ever heard, a moan, right from Izuku's own mouth and straight into her ear. It had reverberated through her whole body. God damn it, Izuku, you can't just, Himiko gasped and her toes curled, you can't just do that and hang up. It's rude to stop before a girl has a chance to. Himiko bit her lip and groaned at the metallic taste that filled her mouth. Finish. Izuku was a nervous wreck. In a few minutes, his father was going to arrive to take everyone inside the Midoriya apartment to a private airfield, and from there it was a quick helicopter ride to Daika City. The whole ordeal was playing havoc with his nerves, making it all but impossible for him to button up his dress shirt and to make sure his cuffs were done up as well. Looking at himself in the mirror, he checked to make sure everything he had on was fine. His skinny white dress shirt was snug against his frame, but he didn't have any issue moving his arms around, a testament to the tailor and his accurate measurements. The same also applied to his pants. Freshly pressed and with a sharp crease down the center, the skinny pant legs were a stark difference to the looser fit pants he wore with his uniform. Finally, the black dress chukka boots were the final part that the tailor had picked out. The one part of the outfit that wasn't slim to skinny. A nice little offset to the rest. All Izuku had left to put on was his suit jacket and his tie, which he glared at angrily. For some reason, no matter what he did, the darn thing would not cooperate. He tied it exactly like he did with his school tie, but while that always turned out perfectly, this skinny strap of black just looked weird. Growling in frustration, Izuku undid the knot and let the tie hang around his neck. Stupid thing. I will make you work. Knock. 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 Deku? Are you okay in there? Ochako called out from the other side of the door to his room. She had come over not that long ago to get changed into her dress and prepare for the dinner. Inko had offered to give her a hand, so she didn't have to worry about getting ready on her own. While Izuku had gotten changed in his room, Inko, Eri and Ochako had taken Inko's room. So if she was at his door, that meant she was already dressed and ready to go. Izuku tried not to let his excitement leak out at the idea of seeing Ochako all dressed up. He didn't even have a clue what her dress looked like. Sorta. Sorta? You okay? Do you need help with something? The door creaked before Ochako quickly added, Are you decent? Why does this feel so familiar, but things have been flipped around? His heart, which sounded way too similar to a snickering Himiko, whispered, Isn't this like a certain dream you had a couple of nights ago? Shut up. Why yeah, I'm decent. The door started to open. This time, Izuku added with a tease and a snicker. The joke helped distract him from the other thoughts in his head. The door whipped open and Ochako glared at Izuku. Oh, don't you start teasing me about that. I've already apologized, oh. Both Ochako and Izuku just sort of stopped for a few seconds as they took in the sight of each other. Izuku in his slim outfit and Ochako in her dress. And her new hairstyle. And her makeup. Ochako's hair was pulled back into a ponytail, and her front bangs pulled back and tucked behind her ears. With her hair pulled back like that, Izuku felt his eyes were drawn to her neck, that he recently dreamed of kissing. The makeup she had on was also captivating. The eyeliner and mascara was not overly dark, and worked to make Ochako's brown eyes vivid and dazzling. On her cheeks, a little blush was added to make her pink spots burst with life, and on her lips, a soft caramel gloss made them so enticing and inviting. Then there was Ochako in a dress. The first thing that stood out about her look was the colors and how it was like her hero costume had been turned into her formal wear, a stylish combination of black for the dress and pink for the lace blazer she wore. Being just able to make out the skin of her well-toned arms through the sheer pink lace of her blazer, with its pleated collar and open front sides, let Izuku know that the bewitching hourglass black dress underneath it was sleeveless, making his imagination run wild with all sorts of permutations on how Ochako would look depending on how she wore that blazer. The dress flowed over Ochako's chest, cinching tight just below her sternum with a band of lace in a way that made it hard for Izuku to ignore her bust, emphasizing her chest without being overly suggestive. The rest of the dress flowed down Ochako's body, drawing Izuku's eyes to her stunning gorgeous bodacious hips and the killer thighs hidden below the slightly pleated and swishily loose skirt that fell gracefully to just above her knee. A skirt that barely did anything to hide calves that Greco-Roman sculptures of Artemis couldn't do justice, propped up by the heels Ochako wore and which after a week with Miruko had become a dangerous weapon to anyone in her way, and to Izuku's heart. Wow! Izuku was left utterly stunned at the beauty before him. His brain had just stopped working, only able to get him to utter the bewildered single word. Ochako flushed, playing with the hem of the blazer. So you think I look good then? Beautiful. The word once again slipped out from Izuku's mouth, but this time he didn't feel like he had to panic. Because there was just no other word that fit. Ochako was beautiful. End of story. You look beautiful, Uraraka. The two dorks then just fidgeted around, neither really sure what to say or do next. Then it suddenly dawned on Ochako that she was in Izuku's room for a reason. Which was what again? To kiss him. Shut up. You want to kiss him? I mean, yeah, but... And after he calls you beautiful? That deserves a big kiss right on the mouth. Yes, but shut the hell up. Do it. Shut the hell up. Oh, why you needed help with something? Ochako said suddenly. It clicked in her head that was why she was in Izuku's room. Not to push him down and cover his face and neck in caramel lipstick. Izuku jolted and then bashfully held up one end of his tie that was still hanging around his neck. I think it's broken. I can't get it to tie right. Ochako blinked, and like a veil had been lifted, the awkward hormonal energy in the room was gone. Replaced with a familiar dorky familiarity. And Ochako laughed, not at Izuku but in relief. That worrying pressure to do something, to cross a line, was gone. And Izuku was back to being her best friend. Deku. One of these days, you really need to learn how to tie your ties. Izuku huffed. I tie my school tie all the time. Rolling her eyes, Ochako walked up to Izuku and popped his collar up. Here. Let me take care of it. Straightening out the tie, Ochako then put Izuku's collar back down. Delicately, Ochako began looping the tie over itself. Working a magic that befuddled Izuku. After all, he had done the exact same things himself, but it always ended in failure. She's so close. Izuku gulped. Ochako really was close now. Close enough that Izuku was hit by the soft aroma of flowers. Perfume? She smells good. Oh, please shut up. And she's so close too. We've been closer. Really? When we spar and she gets me in those gunhead martial arts grapples. You really love it when she's kicking your butt, don't you? Throwing you down on the ground and mounting you. I like sparring with her, yes. Losing, not so much. Hello? I might sound like Toga, but I'm still part of your subconscious. How did that last part fly over your head like that? Yeah kid, that's kinda nuts. And done, Ochako said with a smile, patting the tied tie and taking a step back to admire her work. Let me get your jacket. I want to see you all dressed up. Grabbing the suit jacket for Izuku, Ochako held it open for him. Come on, I want to see. With a smile, Izuku turned around and put one arm through the jacket, then the other. Ochako let go, and still with his back turned, Izuku buttoned himself up and, with a little flourish, spun around. So, what do you think? Oh fuck. What? Deku's fucking hot. Seriously? You know this. But that suit, it fits him too well. The advantage of wearing something not baggy or a school uniform, I guess. What? Are you trying to think of a way to shrink all his clothes down a size? I mean, all I'd have to do is wait for when he's asleep, sneak in and take everything to a local dry cleaners and pop them in a dryer for a little while. It'd only cost a couple of yen. God, you're a lost cause. Oh, you shut up. You'd love this just as much as me. Yeah, but I wouldn't feel guilty about it later. Plus, we both know you're too cheap to try this. Exactly. So save the stupid for the dreams and focus on just confessing already. God, I'm not getting a good night's sleep tonight, am I? Fuck no, you're not. Totally worth it. So you know you're still staring at him, right? Oh fuck. Handsome. Ochako blurted out, making herself and Izuku jump. Wah ha? Izuku blinked, not sure he had heard her right. Ochako, face crimson, repeated, handsome. You look really, really handsome. Now both were fidgeting around. Utterly embarrassed and red-faced. Dorks. Izuku. Ochako. Eri dashed into the room, wearing her brand new dress. A beautiful sky blue dress, with a bright white bow wrapped around her waist. Under the bow, the rest of the dress flowered out in heavy pleats and was dotted with little flowers. Mrs. Midoriya wants to make sure you're both ready. Izuku and Ochako both blinked and returned back to normal. Izuku smiled brightly down at her, putting a hand on her head but being careful not to do anything that would mess up her braided ponytail. Well, don't you look pretty, Eri? Eri cheered at the praise. Let Mom know we're both ready, okay? Nodding her head, Eri bounded out of the room. Izuku chuckled. I think she's the only one looking forward to tonight. Ochako gave Izuku a pat on the back. I'm sure things will go fine. At the very least, we'll get to try a fancy meal. Always looking at the bright side, huh? Free food is free food, Deku. You're not going to stuff appetizers into your purse, are you? I'd never. Right. Well, not in a purse. Would you throw unwrapped food into your backpack? Ochako asked with a sheepish grin. The two started laughing again when Inko poked her head in. Like Izuku and Ochako, Inko had chosen to go with black formal wear. Though the fabric of her dress had a glossy sheen to it that caught the light and made it look like she was wearing a sea of stars that wrapped around her body. The dress encircled her arms, leaving the top of her shoulders bare and wrapped around her chest and waist before flowing towards the ground. Wrapped over her shoulder and arms, Inko wore a dark green chiffon shawl. Well, look at you two. You're both adorable. The twin pair of goofy grins, and Izuku and Ochako both going out of their way not to stare at each other, made Inko smile knowingly. Well, come on then. Our ride is here. Father's here? Inko nodded and put a hand on his shoulder. He is. He's waiting for us down in the parking lot with a limo. Ochako raised an eyebrow. A limo? So it's a limo ride to the airport, a private helicopter ride to Daika City. And another short limo ride to the dinner, Inko confirmed. I just got off the phone with him. Izuku scratched his head. Is it just my imagination, or does this seem excessive? Izuku wasn't the only one to think this. Inko too felt this show was laying it on extremely thick. But that was for her to worry about. Izuku, Ochako and Eri deserved a chance to feel pampered and spoiled. Let me worry about that. I want you three to enjoy yourselves. It's a new experience, and maybe something you can use later. I'm sure these important people coming to the dinner could make for excellent references when you're applying for agencies later on. Ochako nodded, recalling her own talks with Momo. Yeah, Deku. If they want to pull out all the stops, no reason not to take full advantage. Meeting Hisashi downstairs had been a tense few seconds. Ochako swore that as soon as they had stepped up to the limo where Hisashi had been waiting in his expensive Italian black suit and vest, that Hisashi had looked over each and every one of them, making sure they were appropriate, as far as he was concerned, for the evening. It has only been a moment, but those eyes had lacked any kind of warmth, especially when they had looked at her. But as soon as Ochako tried to pay attention to it, Hisashi turned on the charm, complimenting Izuku right away, and then giving Eri a glowing awe and how adorable she looked in her blue flower dress. When he had looked at Ochako again, that coldness was not to be found, but she could still see something in those eyes. He was judging her, even as he complimented her as well. Then Hisashi just heaped praise onto Inko, which Inko took in stride. She knew a game was afoot, but Hisashi wasn't the only one good at it. With a smile, she returned the praise, even letting Hisashi hold her hand as he helped her into the limo. Hisashi was playing his game, so Inko would play hers. There was little talking inside the limo, aside from Hisashi explaining who exactly they were going to be dining with. The accolades of the guests had startled the group. They knew they were important and Hisashi had briefly mentioned them the other evening, but learning exactly who they were was another thing altogether. You shouldn't be surprised, Izuku, Hisashi had said. You've done a great many extraordinary things since starting UA. These accomplishments of course are going to be noticed. Feel pride that they've opened this door for you. When Izuku offered a nervous smile in response, Hisashi changed tactics. Don't forget, All Might doesn't just go around stopping villains and saving lives. Talk show appearances, news interviews, grand openings, and even his share of formal events where he's met with many important people, not only from this country but also from around the world. These are things you'll be doing too when you take his spot as the next number one. Think of this as training for the days to come. Next was the helicopter ride. Even though some members of the group were still anxious about the dinner, the luxurious private chopper they rode in still brought out some childlike awe. As they crested over the mountains, Izuku immediately spotted Daika City below, as well as the tall central tower that stood above the rest of the buildings. Almost like a monument to a king. There are a lot of people here, Izuku observed as the limo slowed and pulled into park in front of Central Tower. A crowd of people had gathered around the entrance, while some security kept them from entering the building's main walkway and steps. Ochako gulped. Yeah. Did I miss something? Hisashi chuckled, a noise Ochako found grating and disturbing since it was so similar to Izuku's. Daika City was a small town until recently. When Detnerat came under Mr. Yatsubashi's control, he decided to set up a satellite location here. Once that foundation was laid, many other companies followed suit, and they had this tower constructed. Once the companies arrived, this small town experienced rapid population and industrial growth, becoming an isolated but thriving community and commercial center. Mr. Yatsubashi became something of a local hero after that. The man saw the potential here and broke ground in a backwater little town, leading others to follow him. His comings and goings are always front news here. The limo came to a stop and Hisashi finished, so, if he's personally throwing a private dinner, there are going to be people that want a chance to see who has caught the great Mr. Yatsubashi's eye. Izuku gulped and leaned over towards Ochako to whisper, "Is it too late to go grab a pizza instead?" A security guard walked up and opened the limo's door. Ochako gave Izuku a pat on the shoulder, whispering back, "'Fraid so, Deku." Hisashi got out first and then reached back for Inko. Taking his hand, and putting on a reasonably believable smile, Inko let him help her out of the limo. Izuku was next, sliding out and immediately doing his best not to look super nervous. He waved and almost flinched when the crowd of people cheered. "It's him! I can see why Yatsubashi has his eye on him. He must be super strong. Can you imagine what he will do for?" "So that's Hisashi's kid?" Wow! Izuku really wanted to jump back into the limo, but some movement from behind stopped him. Hey Deku, kinda need to get out now. Ochako was right behind him, so Izuku quickly moved to get out of her way, but stopped after a step. Nervously, and really questioning if what he was about to do was too familiar, Izuku gathered up his nerves and courage and turned around and extended a hand towards Ochako. Here. Ochako blinked at the hand offered and then smiled warmly. Taking it, Ochako let Izuku lead her out of the limo, Izuku working to make her exit graceful and as beautiful as he could. Out of the limo, for a brief moment, Izuku and Ochako stood face to face smiling at each other. But the flash of magic vanished as Ochako turned to wave towards the crowd and Izuku bent down to help the last member of their group out. Eri? When she wasn't near the open door, Izuku leaned in and saw her bunched up in the seat furthest away. Eri? Izuku could tell right away she was nervous. Scared even. She was looking out the window and at the crowd. You don't think he's here, right? Izuku blinked and immediately turned to scan over the crowd, looking for anyone with a beak. Ochako noticed Izuku looking over everyone and whispered, "Everything okay?" Eri's nervous about the crowd. I'm making sure there isn't anyone that looks like the bad man. After they both did a quick pass and saw no one, they knelt down and reached into the limo. He's not here, Eri. It's perfectly safe here. Ochako nodded. Come on. You won't get those apple sweets if you stay cooped up in the limo. Still nervous, but trusting them, Eri took both Izuku and Ochako's hands and left the limo behind. Holding on to both, the three were greeted with a chorus of ahs. Ochako leaned down and gave Eri some more encouragement while straightening her dress out. See? Everyone thinks you're so cute. That's so adorable. Look at them. Like a little family. Who is that little girl though? A little sister? Oh, look at how they take care of her. They're like a mother and father fawning over their little girl. So cute. Eri's eyes went wide, and looked between Izuku and Ochako as they stood up and took her hand to walk towards the building with Hisashi and Inko. Izuku and Ochako are like my mommy and daddy? While the group made their way towards Central Tower's entrance, the large doors opened and Rikiya stepped out, to thunderous applause. The loud and overwhelming reaction startled the group, with Izuku looking around wondering if maybe some hero had suddenly arrived, but no. It was all for the CEO. Wow, he really is a folk hero to the city. Ochako shook her head. Folk hero? More like a rock star. Rikiya smiled and waved towards the crowd as he walked up to the group. Mr. Midoriya, I'm glad you and your family were able to make it this evening. Hisashi bowed his head. We were honored of course at your generous invitation. Rikiya then took Inko's hand and lifted it up, planting a quick gentlemanly kiss on it. I'm delighted to finally get to meet you, Mrs. Midoriya. Your husband has spoken about you many times. His descriptions of your beauty I fear did not do you justice. It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance. Inko kept her smile, and made sure to keep everything polite, even as she shot Hisashi a questioning glance. He's been talking about me, huh? Rikiya then moved towards Izuku. I would say this meeting has us both a tad more presentable than our last, wouldn't you say, Midoriya? Izuku laughed nervously. As long as I'm not dripping wet, I think any other meeting would be better. Rikiya threw back his head with a laugh, which many in the crowd jumped in on, laughing along with him. Ochako did her best to not look or feel creeped out. Even if she now thought the dial was moving past rockstar and into cult leader territory. And this must be your date. You're a lot luckier than me when I was your age. Ochako fought to keep herself on the ground while Izuku did his best to not start puffing out smoke as he began hyperventilating. Uraraka Ochako, sir. Nice to meet you. Flustered, Ochako winced as she almost screamed her greeting. Rikiya dramatically covered his mouth bashfully. Oops, I think I've embarrassed them. More laughter followed, though Rikiya did hold out a hand to quiet them down. Now, let's not forget what this young lady can do. I'd hate to get on her bad side and get dropped from the sky like she did in her match. Rikiya then pointed at her arm. She also has a wicked hook, and my poor nose would make the perfect target. While the crowd laughed and cheered, Rikiya spread his arms out and motioned for the group to join him. I'm sure you all must be famished. I called in a few favors and got some of the country's best chefs here tonight. I think you all are going to have a wonderful time. Grinning happily, he then turned his eyes down to Eri at last, kneeling down to be at her level. And I hear you have a sweet tooth for apples. I think you'll quite enjoy the desserts the pastry chefs have put together. While Eri had been initially nervous, Izuku could feel her begin to vibrate at the idea of some apple desserts. Following Rikiya, the group got as far as a few steps before a shout from the growing crowd got their attention. Excuse me, Mr. Yatsubashi. Perhaps you and your guests would have time for a photo? For the Daika City Daily? You'd be on the front page for sure tomorrow. Rikiya laughed. I do love supporting the local paper here. What do you all say? Let's get a good shot of us all. While security made sure there was room for them on the steps of Central Tower, Izuku pulled Eri up into his arms while Ochako moved to stand at his side. Inko took the spot on his other side while Hisashi stood behind both of them. Rikiya moved to be directly behind the small group, standing over them all. Everyone ready? The photographer had his camera ready as the group smiled and, in a flash of light, had their pictures taken. After a lengthy elevator ride, the group was led into a large dining hall by Rikiya. The room was a large ring that encircled the main body of the tower, with large windows making up the outer wall, giving everyone a stunning view of the city far below. Allow me to introduce the guests that will be dining with us tonight. Rikiya motioned towards the group that had already been there. These people are good friends of mine, and when I let it slip who I wanted to have dinner with, well, they just had to be here. This is Chikazoku Tomoyasu, a member of the board of directors at Feel Good Incorporated. A tall and lanky man, with long black hair that obscured his face, nodded towards the group. And this is Hanabata Koku, the leader of the Hearts and Minds political party. Koku bowed extravagantly, looking at the group over the rim of his gold and purple glasses. A pleasure. I've been looking forward to this. It's not often I get to meet such a fresh celebrity. Izuku gulped at that. Celebrity? Me? The third and last member of the group smiled wickedly. Oh, you most certainly are. The woman didn't wait to be introduced as she pulled away from the others and sauntered over towards Izuku. Her violet satin dress was low-cut and the slit in her dress ran all the way up to her upper thigh, exposing the sensual pale blue of her leg. With practiced grace, or like a predator moving towards some young prey, she made her way over. UA students tend to make some waves, but you? I'd say you've made some tsunamis. Reaching Izuku, she let her eyes wander, taking in Izuku, soaking up the chance to finally get an up-close and personal look at him. Anyone that can do that, well, they're going to pique my curiosity. Izuku gulped. The feel he was getting from this woman reminded him way too much of Midnight or Himiko. This woman knew she was gorgeous, and was used to being in charge. She extended a hand towards Izuku, which he took. Kazuki Chitose, Executive Director of Shueisha Publishing, and a huge fan. After everything I've seen of you, I hope this won't be our only meeting. Izuku chirped, while to his side, Ochako felt one of her eyebrows twitch. Come now, let the poor boy have a chance to sit down and have something to eat before you start digging for a story, Kazuki, Rikiya said with a shake of his head. Chitose straightened herself up and, after giving Izuku a little wink, turned and headed for the table. Then let's get him seated. He can have a bite, and then I can have my meal. The dining table was beautifully set. Everything, from the tablecloth to the cutlery, screamed expensive. The silverware was actually gold. On each plate was a small name card, designating where each person was going to sit at the table. While Rikiya took his place at the head of the table, Izuku was a little startled to find himself sitting right at Rikiya's right hand. Hisashi then sat on Izuku's right. Next was Inko, and then Eri. Koku sat across from Eri, with Tomoyasu to his side across Inko, followed by Chitose across Hisashi. Last was Ochako, on Rikiya's left and now right across from Izuku. As they were seated, with waiting staff pulling their chairs out and everything, it hit Izuku how grateful he was that she was near. Being sandwiched between his father and his father's boss for the whole meal would feel weird. At least he had Ochako for some safe backup. Though looking at her, she did seem to be thinking pretty hard. Izuku couldn't blame her. There was an unusual number of forks and spoons set up in front of them, some of which he had no idea what they were for. Work your way in with the silverware, but don't use the oyster fork on the right first. Ochako was mumbling to herself softly, recalling everything she could remember from her talk with Momo about fine dining. Chitose watched her, amused. Everything all right? Ochako jumped a little. Oh, just, a friend of mine, Yaoyorozu, gave me some advice on formal events like this. I was just making sure I remembered it all. Hisashi looked at Ochako with a dignified indifference. The girl could at least try and not come off like a country bumpkin. Now, Rikiya said with a smile, I think we're all ready to get started. With a nod, waiters advanced around the table, laying down a small plate with an equally small serving cover still on it. While the plates were set, another waiter came around carrying a stained and polished wooden carrying board, lined with small crystal snifter glasses that sparkled and shined in the light. Carefully, each one was placed next to the adults' plates, as well as those of Izuku and Ochako. The crystal glasses were only a few fingers deep and only slightly wider, offering only a small taste of whatever beverage was going to be added. Eri was given a taller crystal glass filled with ice and water. To the table's side, the head waiter addressed everyone. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of our gracious host, I welcome you to tonight's dinner. The chefs have prepared a truly spectacular 7-course meal for you to enjoy tonight. A waiter approached the head waiter carrying a small wooden box, just about a forearm in length. Opening the front up, the head waiter reached inside and pulled out a decanter filled with a rich amber liquid. This is a fine-aged cognac from the pre-quirk area. The distiller Louis XIII did not survive the turn of the century before it was redounded and became Louis XIV, however several of their masterpieces did. Pulling the stopper out of the decanter, the head waiter handed it to Rikiya, who gave it a quick sniff, humming his approval. After that, the waiter poured some into Rikiya's small glass, before moving towards Izuku. Izuku blinked a few times, a little startled that he was being poured something so expensive sounding and something clearly alcoholic. I might be a bit young? He stammered out while looking over at his mother. Rikiya waved off the concern as he picked up his glass. Midoriya, you need not worry. Neither you nor Uraraka will be consuming enough alcohol to worry about. This is simply a tasting to help whet the appetite along with the aperitif that is being served right now. Rikiya motioned towards the tiny lidded plates being laid out. You'll also have a small tasting of 2 very fine wines as well during the night. Of course the servings for you will only be tasting size, enough to have a taste and nothing more. You and Uraraka are responsible heroes in training and in the company of adults, so there should be nothing to worry about. Hisashi nodded in agreement. I think Izuku is mature enough for this. Don't you agree, Inko? The two parents traded looks. Inko was silently stewing that Hisashi had led the question in such a way that she could only really give one answer. She nodded, it's all right, Izuku. This is a special occasion. A little sip like this is fine. With permission given, Izuku couldn't help getting a little excited. He doubted Katsuki had had a taste of anything alcoholic, so he could think of this as a win. With a smile he said, I guess we get our first taste of alcohol tonight, Uraraka. Ochako smiled nervously, deciding that this was not the appropriate place to confess that this would be her second time, actually. Her first time being a little before moving out of her parents' home. While studying late and not paying attention, Ochako had gone in search of a soda, and had pulled out one of her father's beers by mistake. She had gone through half the can before it hit her that the soda tasted a little strange. Not bad, but not what she had expected. It was only when she finally looked at the can and spat out the last gulp that she realized what she had drunk. Her father had come in, and seeing her sputtering up a storm, found it hilarious. "You didn't think the soda tasted bad, kiddo?" Not really. I kinda liked it. Let's keep this between us until you're older. Mom might not like hearing you say that." Yeah, she was not about to tell Izuku that she apparently had inherited her father's love of beer. The last of the brandy was served, while at the same time the plate covers were pulled off. "I present for your first course, an olive tapenade." Izuku glanced down at the tiny plate. The laperitif was a small round piece of crispy toast, just a little bigger than a cracker, topped with a little mound of coarsely chopped ingredients that had a very strong smell, earthy, salty, and maybe a little fruity. "On the top of your toast is a spread of chopped dried tomatoes, capers, garlic and anchovies. Fresh leaves of basil, thyme, parsley and oregano were shredded into the mix along with a little sprinkle of olive oil. Please enjoy." Eri looked down at her plate, head tilted to the side. "This is dinner?" A few people chuckled while Cuckoo offered Eri a friendly smile. "In a fancy dinner like this, we strange grown-ups like to eat the parts of our meals separately." Eri tilted her head in confusion, so Inko explained. "It's like if you had your mashed potatoes first, then I gave you your hamburger steak after that." "Oh, grown-ups are weird," Eri concluded, earning her more laughs. Izuku watched carefully to see what people were having first. He must have been obvious, because Rikiya pointed towards the food while he picked up his toast. "Let your brandy sit and breathe for a bit." Oh. Nodding, Izuku took a bite and was shocked at how strong the flavors were and just how salty the topping was. It made his mouth water and the smell punched up his nose, clearing his sinuses and making his eyes water. "So Midoriya, I must admit I am extremely curious about you," Rikiya said as he dabbed at his mouth with his napkin. "I very much would love to hear what led you to becoming a student at UA. The path you took must be a fine tale indeed." Izuku picked up his tiny glass, looking into the amber liquid before addressing the question. "It's not a thrilling story or anything. I imagine it's similar to any number of my classmates when you boil it down. Dedication and hard work." Izuku took a sip of the brandy after he saw a few others do the same, and fought to keep himself from coughing. The drink was sweet and nutty, flowery too, and had some earthy taste that Izuku couldn't put a name to. But there was also the unavoidable flavor that Izuku had never had before and had no experience preparing for. The burn of the alcohol. It suddenly made sense why this drink was served in such a tiny glass. No mortal man or woman could just flat out drink this. Oh wow, this is really good," Ochako hummed as she sipped her drink. "Uraraka is scary. Come now, there's no need for such modesty here. I can't imagine the young man I saw fight tooth and nail in an explosive semifinal got into the country's highest standard of academic learning and heroics with just hard work." Tomoyasu's fingers tapped on his glass as he followed up Rikiya with, "Unless you were so strong that the road to getting in was just a cakewalk." Chito smirked. Considering he won, that just might be the case. Raw power and pure talent. All in one package. Izuku almost dropped his glass, shocked at the very idea that he was simply born great. "And no, it's nothing like that. I really did have to work hard to even get the chance to get in." "I believe you did work hard, and it sounds like there's a story behind that, but you mentioned dedication. That requires a motive. Something to drive you forward. So where does your dedication come from? What put you on the path you're on now?" Rikiya asked. If the group was expecting Izuku to have to think on that answer, they were in for a shock. Almost immediately, Izuku had his reply out for them. "All Might." "Oh? When I was little, there was this video I would watch over and over. It was All Might's debut, watching that video and hearing him laugh and smile as he was saving those people. I knew then that's what I wanted to be like." Rikiya tapped the table. "I recall that video. He certainly made some waves when he stepped onto the scene." Ochako put her empty glass down. "I'm almost surprised you didn't say quirks. Considering how you're so obsessed with them." "Obsessed, you say?" Rikiya shared a hidden smirk with his guests that was missed by everyone else. I mean, what's not to be obsessed with? Quirks are the greatest, Izuku said with a chuckle. I'd love them no matter what, but it's the way heroes use them that I find so fascinating. But watching that video sparked something in me, and when that happened, it just was a matter of fact that I was going to be a hero too. Despite the reality of my situation. For your next course, our chefs have prepared a frothy lettuce soup, topped with an onion custard. As soup cups were placed in front of the diners and Izuku wondered how and why someone would want to turn an onion into a custard, his attention was brought back to the conversation. Despite the reality of your situation. What do you mean by that? Well, Izuku paused as he tasted his soup. Yup, it was lettuce all right. Growing up, my quirk was pretty much written off as useless. Curious looked aghast. Who would say something like that? Hisashi paused, his spoon hovering over his soup cup. He was very aware that some eyes were looking right at him. Pretty much everyone said it. Friends, school, Izuku left the last group unsaid, but it was hard to miss the shift in Izuku's eyes as they glanced over to his right. So for most of my life, I didn't even bother to use my quirk at all. It was easier to just admire others and stay in their shadow. Rikiya shook his head, looking downright distraught. It breaks my heart to hear how mistreated you were by the very organizations that are supposed to promote your growth. I might excuse the layman and foolish children, but your schools had quirk counselors, correct? Izuku nodded and Rikiya threw his hands up, exasperated. And these government professionals couldn't see what was right under their noses? None of them? Izuku spooned in a bit of the soup and custard, choosing his next words carefully. They might have been a little distracted at the time. Ochako groaned in annoyance, which made Izuku chuckle. Distracted? Tomoyasu's voice took on a hard tone. These people have a job they're supposed to do. It reflects poorly on those in charge. Chitose nodded. I suppose that's the government for you. Koku feigned offense. You loaned me. Well, at least you're tolerable. Since you actually seem to care about the common people. But getting back on point. Distracted, and your friend seems to be in agreement too. What could possibly distract these people for so long? Well, you see, I had, Izuku's pause made Ochako sigh, a friend that went to the same school growing up. You would have seen him during the sports festival. Bakugou, Ochako tried to not let too much of her disdain leak out. The young man with that explosively powerful quirk? Rikiya asked. You two were in the same schools? All our lives. And he was a distraction? Izuku chuckled again, though it lacked humor. Kaken always knew how to get attention. Even when his quirk first manifested, everyone knew he was going to be special. So people tended to make sure to give him most of their attention. Or know when not to, Ochako added at the end. Which Izuku couldn't disagree with. Rikiya looked between the two. Meaning? Kaken wasn't afraid to use his quirk when he felt like it. Rikiya blinked. Your schools allowed the open use of quirks? Izuku shook his head. No. Nothing like that. They made sure to enforce those rules, just not as much with Kaken. I don't think anyone wanted to get in the way of his growth. So he had a lot of opportunities to practice his quirk. Which I think really helped him become as strong as he is now. While I got a really late start. It wasn't until my last year of junior high that I finally started using and training my quirk as Izuku motioned towards Ochako, prepared to get into UA. There was a lot there Rikiya wanted to unpack, a lot that could be used, but he could circle back to it. If you don't mind me asking, what could a year of training do? Izuku pointed at a fork on the table. The green glow of his quirk enveloped it and himself as he lifted it up and let it hover over the table before bringing it into his hand. This was about the limit of what I could do a year ago. Rikiya gasped while Chitose leaned over. But we saw you at the sports festival. The things you were able to do. It was some pretty intense training, Izuku said with a grin. Ochako nodded. The year of hell. Inko chimed in with a hum. Tough, but the way you two worked and trained to achieve your goals, I hope you know how proud I am of you. It sounds like you two went through the ringer, Rikiya said. Were you following a program or? We had a trainer. Mr. Yagi. Izuku briefly described how after a misadventure with a villain, which almost derailed the whole conversation, Toshinori had happened to witness everything, leading the man to train him and Ochako. Knowing that his mother was right there with them, Izuku downplayed his role against the villain, so that he wouldn't appear too proud of his choice. Incredible. To take that initiative while others did nothing. That shows real character, young man, Rikiya praised. Izuku blinked. Ochako paused as she was about to take another bite of her meal, and Inko's head whipped around to look at Rikiya. So many people now are content to just wait for a solution to come to them. But you? You took the initiative, you grabbed life by the horns and said no, you can't train that, it has to be something you're born with. It was also incredibly dangerous, Inko cut in. Oh, make no mistake, trying to take on a villain like that is indeed dangerous. But the mindset, that's the kind of thinking that will push a person above the common folk. It's no wonder why you reached the landmarks you have, Midoriya. Izuku, despite knowing he might get into a little trouble, sat up a little straighter and smiled a little brighter. It was nice to hear someone praise his decisions. And of course, right on K, Ochako gave him a stern, warning look. Because she was such a worrywart. I wonder, Rikiya began slowly, if your quirk counselors and the system hadn't failed you, what kind of head start you could have had? Instead of playing catch-up. If your schools had treated you like Bakugou and you had been able to refine and practice your quirk regularly. Izuku blinked at that while Rikiya continued, I mean, you said it yourself. It helped make him strong. And I'd say he stands above a great many of your fellow students. Well, we're not supposed to do that, Izuku said slowly. Kaken just got special treatment. Anyone else that tried would have gotten into trouble. Kokush shook his head sadly. To hear of this kind of inequality is heartbreaking. And that the schools seem to foster it even more so. Everyone should have the chance to grow. Rikiya nodded. Yes, exactly. Oh, what was that quote? Yes, the ignorance of quirks will lead to the mistreatment of others. From that will be born inequality. I think that's how it went. Inko froze. Izuku tapped his chin. Equality is a tricky thing, though. We want everyone to be equal, but, Izuku sighed a little, I think that it's simply a fact that people are not created equal. Chitose raised an eyebrow. That's a rather downer look at the world. Maybe, but it doesn't change the fact that it's true. Even my homeroom teacher at UA said something similar. Remember, Uraraka? Ochako nodded. It was something about how schools don't let us use our quirks in school activities. Like our gym classes and such. He said that they're still operating under the assumption that everyone is the same, and that it's old thinking and illogical. Rikiya tapped his chin. A very pragmatic view. Not one I'd expect from a hero if I'm honest. I'd imagined they would want to push to have everyone view everyone else as the same. Izuku shook his head. Some might, but Mr. Aizawa prefers to make sure we have a better understanding of the world than that. People aren't the same. But that's why there are heroes. Because there will always be people who are weak, and it should be the responsibility of the strong to protect them. For your fish course, may I present to you, Samanalo Sile. When the cover was pulled away, Izuku was relieved to see that the plate was more normal than the last two courses. A fillet of salmon cut into circles and arranged on top a small pool of a creamy white sauce with the scent of fresh lemon juice drifting up from the plate. Not that the other courses had been bad. Izuku just thought they might be a bit too fancy for him. As for the brandy, he breathed fire and hadn't burned his throat as bad as that drink had. How was Uraraka able to drink it so casually? Chitose smirked openly as she started to cut into her meal. So, Midoriya. What exactly is UA like? Different from your past schools at the very least, sure, but what details can you share? Even people in positions like ours don't get to go past the front gate very often. Rikiya laughed. I can say it's a very big campus. I'm still sore from all that walking. That got some chuckles from the group. Izuku tapped his fork on his plate while he thought about it. Gosh, how do you describe UA, Uraraka? How abnormally normal it is. That is a good place to start. We're still taking our core curriculum, Izuku agreed. Chitose frowned. Really? That's, unfortunately, boring. Oh, UA is anything but boring. Our very first day, our class had to do a quirk apprehension test, and we were told that whoever got in last place would get expelled. Ochako shuddered at that fun memory. Our homeroom teacher wanted to see how we'd use our quirks. It's where that whole "the schools are behind" thing comes from. Mr. Aizawa wanted us to use our quirks while we were performing exercise and fitness tests. Laps around the track, ball toss, long jumps, those kinds of things. It really drives home just what a basic application of a quirk can do for something, Izuku added. Rikiya nodded. It makes one wonder just how things would be different if that level-headed logic was shared among the schools and country as a whole. It was eye-opening, Izuku agreed, and then immediately after that, in our first heroics lesson, we had a battle trial. Which is something I doubt other schools make their students deal with. It must be liberating, having the chance to use your quirks openly, Rikiya observed. I mean, I wouldn't go, Izuku trailed off when Ochako started to giggle. What? Deku, I saw you get smug during some of our lessons. Don't pretend you weren't giving Bakugou the eye when you got a chance to show off. Izuku blushed. I don't do that. Ochako raised an eyebrow. I can make a few calls, Deku. Get a second opinion if you want. Scratching at his neck, Izuku finally conceded, it might have felt a little good finally getting a chance to show off and let loose a little. Rikiya chuckled. Young man, have you watched any videos of the sports festival you were in? Your matches? Izuku shook his head. During your match with Bakugou, I have to say, you had a wicked-looking smile on your face. Absently, Izuku focused on his plate, cutting up a piece of fish and scooping a little sauce onto it with his knife. I guess it felt a little good. Nothing wrong with making sure that people know who you are and give you proper respect, Tomoyasu said definitely. Absolutely. If there is one thing a person must have in this world, it's respect. Especially if you have power, Chitose said with a nod. Rikiya added, given a chance to finally shine and demonstrate your quirks, I must ask Midoriya. Despite some of the, let's say more unfortunate events, would you say you're happier now that you can freely use your quirk? I mean, we can't just go around using our quirks whenever we want. It still has to be related to our lessons. Mostly, Ochako chimed in. Mostly, Izuku confirmed. But you are less restrained. It must feel liberating? Izuku nodded. I guess so, yes. It is nice to be free to be more like myself. But that comes with a lot of responsibility. Oh, of course. As does anything you do when you grow up, really. As you get older, you are responsible for more things, but at the same time, you're free to expand and open yourself up. I sometimes wish that this feeling you feel, Midoriya, could be something shared by everyone. Waiters came back into the room, wheeling out trays that, even covered, filled the room with the smell of beef, fresh herbs, mushrooms, garlic and butter. A lot of butter. The head waiter returned with the other waiters, carrying a bottle of wine. As the carts were wheeled into place and carvers, holding sharpened knives, took their positions, more waiters came and placed down sparkling crystal wine glasses, along with 2 small glasses for Izuku and Ochako. Izuku gulped nervously, hoping that this next drink wouldn't burn like the last one, while Ochako smiled brightly. The head waiter pulled the cork out of the bottle, once again handing it to Rikiya, who examined it and gave it a brief sniff. We have a special treat for your main course this evening. This is a Domaine de la Romanée-Conti Grand Cru, from the golden vines of Burgundy, France. A pinnacle of the French art of wine. That must mean it's really expensive. If I look these up, maybe I shouldn't let Uraraka know. As the bottle was handed off to another waiter who began pouring the drinks, the head waiter motioned towards the plates in front of everyone. For your mains, Chateaubriand and Chateau potatoes. The tray covers were removed. Izuku blinked for a moment at the long cuts of beef that were surrounded by peeled potatoes that couldn't be larger than the tip of his thumb, sitting in a creamy mushroom and butter sauce. The meat though looked blackened and charred. He absently worried that maybe it had been overcooked. Then the waiters cut into it, and Izuku watched the blackened meat fall away and a beautifully cooked beef tenderloin remain. The head waiter noticed Izuku's look. Allow me to explain, this Chateaubriand was cooked in the ancient and traditional way. The prized beef tenderloin is wrapped in lesser cuts of meat and cooked. Once those lesser cuts have charred, we know that the tenderloin has been cooked to perfection. Izuku didn't need to look across the table to know that this kind of extravagant waste was going to bother Ochako. When he did turn to look at her, he was impressed at how well she was hiding it. Her swooning was almost non-existent, and the twitch in her brow was only noticeable if you were looking for it. Yeah, better not look up how much all this food costs until she's gone home. As the plates were served and the last of the wine poured, Izuku shifted his attention back towards Rikiya, as his words from a few minutes ago bounced around in his head. Mr. Yatsubashi, if you don't mind me asking? What did you mean when you said that you wish what I feel could be something shared by everyone? Rikiya picked up his wineglass and swirled the dark ruby liquid around. I suppose that's a bit of a tricky question. Do you mind if I answer your question with a question of my own? Izuku shook his head, and Rikiya took a sip of his wine. Do you think the world we live in is just? Just? Izuku shared a questioning look with Ochako, who was sipping her wine already. I'm not sure I follow. How to say this? Do you think the way our country governs its people is just and fair? Is it right? Ochako blinked. Are you talking about corruption? Like governors taking bribes, or dirty cops? Rikiya laughed as he shook his head. No. Nothing like that. Izuku, despite himself, recalled Tartarus and felt a little heat raise as he spoke. Oh, I was thinking that's what you meant. Because Izuku trailed off, but everyone caught the tone in Izuku's voice. A layer of bitterness and anger kept buried and locked away. While Rikiya took another sip of his wine, Koku cut into his perfectly pink steak. That is a tone I've heard more times than I can count. Someone here has had a run-in with some government red tape. Izuku turned his attention to his plate, picked up his own little wineglass and took a sip, wincing but also welcoming the strange heat of the alcohol, while Ochako roughly bit into a potato. Totally not imagining it was a multi-armed man's head. Chitos hummed. I suppose that business with Toga Himiko came with some governmental business that was eye-opening. Izuku was slow to answer. I don't think we're allowed to discuss that. I suppose that makes sense. But as I was saying, I was not thinking of something so specific towards the government. I spoke in more broad terms, and more towards the people in this country, Rikiya clarified, noting the hints of anger in the two students' eyes but also knowing that this was not a subject to get into. Not just yet at least. Towards the people? Izuku, back to normal, tilted his head to the side as he inquired about that. Do you think the way things are helps stimulate a person's growth and the people's betterment? I think so. At least I don't think the government is going out of its way to try and hurt people. Doing something like that just seems counterproductive. Inko looked at Rikiya before giving Hisashi a questioning look, watching him closely. Hisashi could feel Inko's eyes on him and glanced over at her. The look she had in her eyes was unusual. He could see that she was thinking. And whatever was running through her mind was centered around him. Which was odd, since he wasn't the one talking. Counterproductive, Rikiya hummed at that word. A very interesting word choice. I mean, for us to grow as a country and as people, we can't be restricted. Sure, there are rules and laws, but that's just to make sure things don't get crazy. It's villains who break those rules and laws that cause people pain. And it's heroes, Rikiya asked, that come in to help relieve people of their pain? That's what heroes are supposed to do, Izuku confirmed. Beat the bad guys and save people, Ochako said with pride. That's what we're training to do. Rikiya cut into his steak and took a bite, chewing on it, and continued, if you don't mind me asking then, what makes a bad guy? Said both Izuku and Ochako. You said, beat the bad guys. I'm just curious who you think are the bad guys? Izuku and Ochako shared some looks as they both thought about an answer. The question seemed simple enough, but their past experiences also told them that there wasn't a black and white answer. When I first started going to UA, I would have said villains. People who break the laws for their own gains or to hurt people. But now, I know it's a little more complicated than just that. Ochako nodded in agreement. Yeah. You're both very young to already understand the world has shades of gray to it. I'm very impressed. Too often, you see people default to simplistic worldviews, and when someone falls outside of that view, they are labeled villains and then that's that. It's not a label easily removed. People are all different. Sometimes certain rules are more difficult to live with for some people than what it is for others. Izuku thought of Himiko when he said that. A thought shared by Ochako. Then, if a rule causes strife, if it isn't something that can be applied to everyone fairly, is it still good to enforce it? Is it right and just? If that was the case, the government would repeal the law, or change it. Heroes don't make the laws. But you do enforce them. I don't, Izuku shifted in his seat. I guess we do what we can, with what we can. Even if the law you are enforcing clearly is hurting someone and not another? And what do you do if this person, who has been caused so much pain because of this law, pushes back? Breaks it? Not for selfish reasons, but just because of how unjust it is. Are they a villain? Izuku tapped his plate with his fork, thinking carefully. I don't think there's a law like that out there. What about the quirk restriction laws? Izuku froze. Ochako stopped mid-bite. Hisashi smiled. Inko was unreadable. Eri chomped on a potato. By your own admission, Midoriya, the law isn't applied equally, and you have suffered because of it. And not just because you followed the law, but because your classmate, Bakugou, didn't. But he was praised and lifted above you. Izuku sat in silence. And I think that if you tried to do what he did, you would have been punished. Izuku shifted around in his chair, because the truth of that was an uncomfortable pill to swallow. How is that fair? That he was allowed to grow, to further himself, while others were bound by a rule that kept them restrained? Midoriya, I can't help but imagine where you'd be right now if you had been allowed to grow naturally, instead of being stunted. Inko cleared her throat. If you don't mind me interjecting, this is a very heavy topic to be having at dinner. Don't you think so? Rikiya's eyes drifted from Izuku to Inko, who was looking at him with a steely gaze. I don't mean to pressure the boy, but this is a unique opportunity for me. Quirks fascinate me. It's why I've pushed the growth of Detnarat when I took over. Because I love quirks, and want to see them grow, and I want to believe the inventions my company makes will help people as the quirks in our world grow and become stronger. I make no secret of my love, and as a CEO, my likes and dislikes are very well known. So I've been part of conversations that come from so many different worldviews. Some so foreign that they made my head spin. People have had ideas and opinions that never would have crossed my mind by myself. People know what I like, and any chance they get, they love to share their own ideas with me. Because they know I will eat it up. Inko nodded, though her eyes drifted over to Hisashi for a moment. Any chance they get, she muttered to herself. Too quiet for anyone else to hear. But one viewpoint I've never had the chance to hear is that from a hero. Or an aspiring hero. So I admit I'm being a little selfish here and taking advantage of this situation to talk about an idea recently shared with me by an employee. Recently by an employee? Izuku asked, what idea? What would the world be like if there were no quirk restriction laws? A salade lyonnaise for your next course. The fresh bitter frizzy and warm vinaigrette will help cleanse the palate. With the heavy main course finished, the waiters were going around collecting the plates and serving the next course. As they did, Izuku had to do a small double take inside his head to replay what he had been asked. I'm sorry? Someone posed the question to me, and I must say, it led to a riveting conversation. But everyone that I discussed it with were all people who were more like myself. Well off, and maybe a tad disconnected from the average person. And they were most certainly not heroes. You though? Why, you have a foot in both worlds, and you also have a love of quirks like I do. You seem to be the perfect person to bounce the idea off of. I'm certain you'd have a viewpoint that would be enlightening. A world without quirk restriction laws? What a juicy topic, Chito said as she stabbed at her salad. Where'd that idea come from? I was given a book as a gift. It had to do with quirks, and someone decided it would be perfect for me, was Rikiya's answer. Inko looked at Rikiya before shifting her gaze back towards Hisashi. A book? Izuku sat in silence, poking at the poached egg that sat on top of his greens. It's an interesting idea. I suppose some might say it's time to embrace the idea and move on from old ways of thinking, but I'm not sure if it's a practical solution. It'd be chaotic, though. Like how it was when quirks started popping up originally. The world just sort of stopped functioning, Ochako added, though Izuku shook his head at that. No, I don't think it'd be like that, Uraraka. That got a few raised eyebrows. Quirks back then were so new, people didn't know what to do with them. The very question of what made a person human was getting called into question. With how people understand quirks now, how they are a part of us and so common, society would probably just keep moving along. Hisashi looked down at Izuku. You think things would keep going along as normal? Never underestimate a person's desire to just keep going and not cause or be a part of trouble, Izuku said simply. Ochako recalled the early days when she had met him. How Izuku would go out of his way to avoid the bullies at school. Izuku was speaking from experience there. Rikiya shrugged. Well, if things would keep going and there wouldn't be any cataclysmic fallout, why do you think it wouldn't work? It sounds like it would. It might, but it just wouldn't be practical. Because there would be issues. People aren't created equally, but they are supposed to be treated equally. In a way, that's the safety net that quirk restriction laws provide. If that's gone, then quirks might end up becoming a major factor in how people can live their lives. Speaking plainly, that's how things are now. Certain fields of work look specifically for people with certain kinds of quirks. Take electrical quirks. Those are so highly sought after in the job markets. I've read that's why there are so few heroes with electric quirks, because the job market can match the pay but there's no risk of, well, death, like there is with being heroes. Quirks are a part of our lives, and do play a role in how things work, but I'm talking about if they become the focal point. Suddenly, a person might be forced into a role in life just because their quirk fits it better than others. Then there's also what happens if two people with the same quirk are trying to get the same job. What happens then? Chitos answered, I'd imagine the person with the strongest version of the quirk would get the job. Izuku frowned. If that's the logic that's accepted going forward, then whole new issues pop up. What happens to the people who have weak quirks? Because the ones with the strong quirks will want to only be with other people with strong quirks. So that might lead to things like quirk marriages. That kind of thinking, Mike makes right, and social Darwinism could easily creep back into the world. Ochako rubbed her hands together, recalling how her parents' quirks didn't really help with their jobs as it was, and the problems it had caused with their lives. So, the way things are is just fine, then? No, it's not, Izuku immediately answered. He tapped his fork on his plate, searching for words. I think the laws are there to make sure everyone is treated equally. To normalize that everyone is supposed to be the same. But people aren't all the same. And it's the different ways the laws are applied to different people that is the issue. Bakugou, Ochako let slip. Izuku nodded. And Toga. Izuku took a last bite of his salad before putting his utensils down. Kaken was praised for his quirk. He was lifted above everyone else, and as a result, he got away with a lot. Toga, on the other hand, she was mistreated because of her quirk. Told that anything she did that wasn't seen as normal was wrong. The nail that sticks out gets hammered down, Rikiya offered. Izuku nodded. Except not for everyone. And when the rules aren't applied fairly, that can lead to problems. I've seen, Chito slid in, the reports on what happened to that young girl in your class. If there was ever a victim of the government's quirk restriction laws, she might be the poster child. Izuku paused and glanced over at Chitose. Something about the way she had said that felt off. Maybe because after talking with Himiko about what had happened to her, she had hammered it into his head to not think of her as a victim. She hated that kind of thinking, even if he did think it was true. But it was also Chitose's timing that seemed odd. There was a hint of excitement? It just felt out of place. Of course, these were social elites and rich people. They were odd to begin with. Both cases can lead to a lot of resentment. Toga lashed out because they tried to hammer her into place, and around Kaken, early on I saw quite a few of my classmates get pretty upset that he kept getting free passes. A few tried to fight him because of it, and of course, after they lost, they would get into trouble, but Kaken didn't. Which led to even more resentment. Rikiya leaned back. That resentment against the system, and the people perpetrating it, those dark feelings, can lead to a lot of suffering. One could argue that the uneven application of the law may have a direct link to the villains that roam this world. People who wouldn't let themselves be hammered in, or who hated seeing others left to grow and stand out. Saito. Izuku could still see the hate and rage in that boy's eyes. Saito fit that last case so well. But that's why we have heroes, Ochako said. To stop people that become like that. Stop them and protect the people that they would hurt. Rikiya hummed. Is it really a solution though, if the answer is part of the cycle? Neither Izuku or Ochako had an answer for that right away. Izuku thought about it for a little longer and came up with the best response he could. It might not be perfect, but against villains, people can't defend themselves. Heroes are there to save as many as they can, to let people know that even when things are at their darkest, there are those that will help bring the light back. Heroes save, heroes protect, and heroes fight. They are strong for people who can't be strong. Rikiya nodded, his smile never leaving his face. Strong for those who can't be strong. That is a heartfelt and noble ideal to strive for. Izuku frowned. It wasn't that Rikiya sounded insincere, but with the way he had been talking, Izuku asked, "Sir, do you think our world would be better off without heroes?" Ochako raised an eyebrow at the idea, while Inko paid close attention. Rikiya gave that some thought with a soft hum. I'm not sure I'd go that far. No. I'm in no hurry to see heroes off the streets. In fact, I have a great deal of respect for them, it's why I've pushed so hard to get into hero support items. I do sometimes think, though, what is the end goal of heroes? End goal? Izuku had never thought about something like that. Was there an end goal? I'm not sure there is one. A hero's work is always to protect others. Rikiya paused. Shouldn't the end goal be to create a world that doesn't need heroes? He let that idea marinate, watching as Izuku and Ochako both sat silently in deep thought. As they did so, he added one last thing towards his point. Forgive me if I butcher this quote, but it seems just too perfect not to be used. Rikiya cleared his throat. If people become used to the idea of being cared for, where goes the drive to better themselves? Our world was built by humanity's will to push on. They say to trust them to look out for us, but what do we do when they are no longer there? Or something like that. I might have added my own little flourish. Inko felt her breath catch in her throat. Plates were cleared away, and the waiters set out a large tray in the center of the table. A le plateau de fromage, the head waiter had called it. A cheese platter. Except this was on a whole different scale. Camemberts, Roqueforts, Brie, Havarti, Blue d'Auvergne, and many more. Little jars of jams were included with the array of cheeses together with some figs and grapes. The variety would have left Izuku speechless if he wasn't currently involved in an in-depth political conversation with his father's boss. He hadn't expected this, and while the topic was going in a direction he had never thought about before, it was still interesting. And having someone looking for his opinion was a welcome change of pace. I suppose I get what that quote is trying to say: if people get too used to always being helped, they'll become dependent, but expecting people to be able to handle villains or accidents or natural disasters seems unrealistic. There have always been trained professionals, even before quirks. A fair point. Plus, the quote doesn't really apply to heroes, if I'm honest. It was more about the government, though the spirit of the idea can still apply, I think. Izuku tilted his head to the side as a thought crossed his mind. That quote, is it from the same book you mentioned before? The one that talked about the quirk registration laws? It was indeed. It seems like whoever wrote it was not a fan of the government. Rikiya barked out a laugh before recovering. That is an understatement. So the book talked about people being able to use their quirks whenever they wanted and spoke against the government? In a sense. It was also a warning about what we, as a people, should not be willing to give up, and to question why we are being asked to sacrifice to begin with. Really fascinating stuff. Rikiya cut a slice of Havarti cheese from the board and, while he added a little raspberry jam to it, continued, "Oh, what was that opening line? It so perfectly summed up what the book was about. It talked about how we as a people should embrace who we are. A sprinter runs, a chef cooks. These talents are embraced openly. Shouldn't quirks? That line of logic. Your friend would be a prime example of what was talked about in it. He was openly embraced, and from that, he excelled. You, sadly, were not so fortunate, and by your own words were pushed down with the rest when you so obviously have an incredible gift." Izuku chewed on his next word slowly. That was an interesting point, and Izuku supposed Katsuki was an example of a person who excelled because the rules everyone else followed didn't seem to apply to him. As Izuku pondered, Inko put down her drink and began to speak. Calmly and, to Izuku and Ochako at least, strangely. Her voice had an air of memory to it, distant and far. It is the pinnacle of governmental greed, pride, and arrogance to think that the restriction of a person's natural talents and gifts is for the betterment of humanity. Never has there been a time in human history that a person's talents have been so oppressed and spit on than this very moment. Our gifts, our meta-abilities, should not be suppressed but embraced. They are who we are, and to deny them is to deny ourselves. You don't tell a scientist not to think, you don't tell a football player not to run, an architect not to create, a chef not to cook. Why should a person who can fly be told to keep his feet on the ground? To suppress, and to punish, will only create a world of resentment and hate. It will boil underneath the surface of this perfect world the governments want you to believe exists, and when the day comes, when it finally boils over, the death and despair will be felt for generations. Let us be who we are, for only us, the future of the human race, can prevent this horror from coming to pass. Ochako tilted her head to the side. Meta-abilities? That name rang a bell, but she couldn't place it. Rikiya's eyes widened. You've read it too, and you have parts memorized? The other guests were looking at Inko with some shock. Hisashi's head had whipped around and his jaw had gone slack. Inko? Inko blinked and seemed startled that she had spoken up at all. Flustered, she sipped at her wine, while at the same time wondering if she might have had a bit too much, considering how loose-lipped she had just been. She hadn't meant to speak up, hadn't meant to pull those words up from a dark part of her soul, but hearing them so casually spoken by another, something dead had been given a fresh gasp of life. Stuck, Inko knew she couldn't just pretend she hadn't spoken, but she could try and steer the conversation away. She didn't say anything to Hisashi, but instead addressed Rikiya. With respect, that book isn't something I think should be discussed so openly in such a polite setting. Izuku looked at Inko. Mom, it's okay. I've been enjoying the talk. even if the topics have been a little tough. Inko just shook her head. The topic, she paused before choosing her next words carefully. I think it's fine to talk about, it's the book in particular I think we should avoid talking about. Rikiya pondered Inko for a moment before leaning forward with his hands folded in front of him. I don't recall there being anything particularly shocking about it. It was a discussion about the fundamental use of quirks in our world. Inko frowned. Then you're not aware of what happened to the author. More hidden glances were shared between Rikiya and his guests. I can't say that I am. I see. He was arrested after he and some other people decided to protest the government's new quirk laws. Izuku looked a little startled. Arrested? How'd you know that? Oh, when I was your age, my school had us do some book reports. His book was the one I ended up drawing from the lot. I'm actually surprised I even remember it after all these years. A book report? Rikiya clarified. That's right, Inko answered, and I suppose I'm just a nervous mother when it comes to those kinds of things now when they involve my little boy. Izuku flushed and groaned, Mom. Rikiya laughed. Oh, it's all right. I know better than to get on the wrong side of a doting mother. And with dessert on its way, Eri noticeably perked up, perhaps a change in topic is in order. When the tray lid was removed by the head waiter, stars formed in Eri's eyes. She bounced in her chair, full of excitement and joy. For your dessert, our chef has made for you a wonderful apple tart. The tart was encircled with a crispy brown crust, and covering the top, thin slices of apples were arranged into the shape of flower petals that cascaded around and met in the center, their edges browned, caramelized and glistening. Inko had to reach over and use a napkin to wipe some drool from Eri's chin while the table chuckled at her innocent excitement. As slices were cut, Koku addressed Izuku and Ochako. So, what are your plans going forward? Passing our upcoming term finals, Ochako said with a sigh which Izuku echoed. No, I mean for your futures. What's the next step for you now, work studies I'd imagine? Izuku scratched his chin. Well, the next chance for internships is next year after the sports festival. Nothing sooner? Izuku shook his head. Work studies would require us to have our provisional hero licenses. That's not something first years get. Rikiya huffed. Says who? Izuku didn't have an answer. He just knew that students in their first year don't get to apply for those licenses. Chitose tapped her chin. I would think your real-world experience would let you advance quicker. You have already fought real-life villains, right? Izuku rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed but also a little proud. Ochako rolled her eyes. Great, that's just what Deku needs. And you were also in Hosu City too, right? You must have been neck-deep in the action, Chitose said with a grin. Izuku laughed weakly. Neck-deep and trying not to drown. That was a whole mess. Well, anything you can walk away from and all that, Koku added before grinning over at Rikiya. You know, with your business getting into hero support items, maybe you should hire Midoriya here to wear your gear. With the way his star is rising, you'll get nothing but good publicity. Rikiya laughed. Now there's an idea. What do you think, Midoriya? I could have some contracts written up before you leave. My lawyers are on speed dial. Izuku almost dropped his slice of apple tart. I'm honored at the idea, but I don't think UA will let me wear gear that isn't supplied by an approved organization. And father said you're still in the testing phase. Rikiya shrugged. This is true. That principle of yours is a shrewd one. Also, Izuku trailed off. Also? Hatsum would kill me if I suddenly started wearing someone else's products. Ochako nodded. She'd find a way to make everything self-destruct. Rikiya tapped his chin. Oh yes, that wonderful young woman I met with you. The student from the support course. A remarkable mind on that one. Well, I think I have an easy fix for your predicament, Midoriya. Oh, I'll just hire her, Rikia said with a huge grin. After all, I didn't get where I am now by letting talent just slip through my fingers. Why worry about competing, when you can just buy out your competition? Chitos chuckled. How devious. Rikia looked offended, though the twinkle in his eye said otherwise. Me? Devious? Perish the thought. But aren't you a CEO? Ochako let slip, before immediately covering her mouth. Rikia laughed. Oh, that's funny. It looks like your wit is as devastating as your quirk. Ochako blinked. Eh? We watched you too, dear. Dropping your opponent like that. Very clever. I should probably get you on my payroll too, while I'm at it. Ochako tried not to look too excited at the idea. Making friends with rich backers could have a huge upside. Chitos smirked. You might have to. I get the feeling these two, she pointed at both Izuku and Ochako, are a packaged deal. Both Izuku and Ochako flushed, but neither denied the point. Something Hisashi noticed. Something you want to say on the matter, Izuku? Izuku rubbed his neck. Well, when Mr. Hanabata asked us about our future plans, we just talked about school stuff. But after school, well, we've thought, instead of doing what graduates normally do, working as sidekicks for a hero agency for a few years, Ochako filled in, with Izuku nodding. That instead, we'd try to form our own agency. Me, Uraraka and Toga, I mean. Aside from Mary happily munching on her third slice of apple tart, the room got quiet as each person absorbed the news. Shifting around under the multiple looks, Izuku quickly added, we've only really talked about the idea a couple of times. We haven't really looked into what we'd have to do, we've been so focused on our upcoming term finals, but, Izuku looked at Ochako. It is something we want to aim for. And I think we can. Ochako smiled brightly. Definitely. It's not the way it's normally done, so it'll probably be a huge pain, but sometimes, the best roads to take are the ones you forge yourself. You have ambition, Rikia said as he looked at the two. I knew you two were hard workers, your displays of strength made that clear. But it's one thing to be strong and to work towards a goal, another thing entirely to set your sights higher than your peers. To take that extra step against the norm. Power, drive and ambition. These qualities, in my field you may run into a person with one or two. Very rarely do you see someone with all three. They're the ones that go places. That makes a difference. No, you two, I think I made the right decision. Midoriya, Uraraka, will watch your careers with great interest. Rikia stood in the dining room of Central Tower, looking out the windows at the city before him. The dinner had ended not long ago, and now he replayed the events in his mind while watching Daika City, his city, bristle with liberated life. Behind him, Kuku, Tomoyasu, Hisashi and Chitos sat in their chairs, also making up their minds about how the night went. That boy is deeply ensnared by the hero society, Tomoyasu observed. With All Might as the root cause. If All Might is the pillar that's holding this world up, that boy is chained to it. Chitos glanced over at Hisashi. If only the poor child hadn't been left alone all these years. He could have been pushed towards a more convenient and more positive influence. It doesn't help that his friend is seemingly just as dedicated to becoming heroes as he is. Did you see the way they would look at each other during dinner? Their commitment towards their goal is fueled by each other. They're feeding on the other's passion for heroes, Kuku added. Chitos smirked. Passion is a good word. They have passion for their goals, but also each other. It's all a self-sustaining mess. Hisashi frowned. Then perhaps we need to find a way to remove her from my son's life. Tomoyasu regarded Hisashi coldly. Are you suggesting having your boy's dearest friend killed? Hisashi crossed his arms. I'm committed to ensuring my son is liberated. That's all. No one is questioning your commitment, Midoriya, Rikia finally said, but let us look at every option before we decide to remove someone from the board. It's true, that young woman pulls your son away from us, but, Rikiya held up a finger, the opposite could prove just as true. Should your son move closer to us, he could pull her along with him. She is not a piece to be tossed away. If it comes to it, it will be an easy matter to do. But let's not be short-sighted with potential soldiers. So you think Midoriya's son isn't a lost cause, then? Tomoyasu asked. Rikiya shook his head. He is chained to the hero world, there is no doubt about that, but he is not blinded by it. He has experienced the hypocrisy of the world and suffered from it. Not once did he dismiss the ideas I floated, and in fact, he gave them careful thought. The chains holding him are strong and tight, but no chain is stronger than its weakest link. We find those, we break them, and Midoriya will be liberated. We will have to tread carefully though, Kuko said, not just to ensure we don't alarm the boy, but to make sure we don't raise the suspicion of his mother. Her immediate step to prevent your discussion from going further, that's a problem. Perhaps. But like the boy, I see hope in that woman. It was Destro's words that raised her concerns, not the topic itself. That says something. That she still has the exact words etched into her heart, says something. She is lost. She has lost sight of Destro, but not his message. So much like you were, Midoriya. Rikiya looked at Hisashi. For so long, you yourself had lost your way, but were led back to the flock. Once you saw the truth, you came back. Even after what you experienced and lost. Tomoyasu tapped the table as he spoke up. We need to tread carefully with her. She knows enough to be a risk. And she has direct connections with All Might through that little girl. Agreed, Rikiya said, turning fully towards Hisashi. Continue to work to get back into her good graces. See how much she still believes in the message, but take care to avoid using Destro's name. It's obvious she is not yet ready to learn about me. She's too skittish for my liking, Tomoyasu added. Chitose shook her head. She's not skittish. She's wounded. There's a big difference. A huge difference. A skittish animal will run. A wounded animal? Well, Kuko trailed off. Hisashi agreed with the feelings of unease around Inko. While they had both gotten out of Bespin bloodied and broken, Inko still carried those deep wounds. And like any wounded animal, it wouldn't take much to make her lash out. Towards her enemies, or her friends. That's assuming Inko could even tell the difference now. Are you sure you want to see this, Uraraka? Deku, I'm a big girl. And I'm sure you're just trying to make it seem bigger than it actually is. I swear, boys exaggerate about the silliest things. It's big, I swear. Then let me see. Izuku sighed. Okay, but you asked for this. Izuku dramatically pulled it out and plopped it right into Ochako's hands. Oh. You see. I knew you'd think it was too. Wah-ah. Ochako's eyes went wide as she looked at the numbers on Izuku's phone. The prices of the meals they had eaten, and especially the drinks they had been served. Why? What did you think he was talking about? 12,500? That's in yen, right? Ochako pleaded. There was no way that brandy could cost that much. USD, Izuku confirmed as Ochako's legs wobbled. Maybe you want to give me my phone, BA. 25,000? For wine. Ochako's eyes rolled back into her skull and Izuku dashed forward, wrapping an arm around her waist to keep her from falling to the ground. I warned you. Izuku said, not able to hold back the soft chuckle that followed. After the dinner and return trip home, Izuku had tried to slyly look up the prices of everything. The food had been tricky, but not the drinks. Izuku had almost swallowed his tongue when he saw them, and unfortunately, Ochako had noticed his distress. So when the limo had stopped to drop Ochako off, and Izuku had offered to walk Ochako to her door, she had pounced and demanded to know what had gotten him so shocked. Ochako shook her head. That's rent payments, Deku. Months of rent payments. Oh man, the room is spinning. We're outside your apartment. The world is spinning, then. Are you drunk? What? No. We had 2 small glasses, Deku. That's like 2 or 3 shots. You can't get drunk on that. How do you know how much a shot is? Oh, you hush. Maybe you're the drunk one. Izuku rolled his eyes. And what makes you think that? He didn't mention he could swear that everything just seemed a little nicer right now. But that was just because he was happy to be on his way home. Nothing more. Well, you've been holding onto my waist for a while now and haven't freaked out yet. Izuku blinked. Ochako also blinked as she realized what she had just said. Both then took stock of their position. Ochako had both her hands on Izuku's shoulders, her body tantalizingly close to Izuku's, leaning into the arm wrapped around her and pulling her in. If someone walking by saw them like this, it would look like Izuku was pulling Ochako into a very sensual kiss. And Ochako was looking all too eager to reciprocate. As it fully dawned on both how they looked, both of their faces went pink, but neither immediately leapt back. Their brains, the part of themselves that always used logic and common sense to prevent anything from sparking between them, was dulled. Not to some extreme degree, but it turns out a small sip of alcohol was enough to keep both Izuku and Ochako calm in this gift of a moment. Calm and smiling. Calm and smiling and leaning forward. Leaning towards each other. The motion was small, and only lasted for the briefest moment before they slowly separated. Ochako's hands sliding down Izuku's firm chest and Izuku's fingers gliding over the soft curve of the small of Ochako's back and hip. The touches left them feeling warm and fuzzy. A tingling on the skin that left them begging for more. Separated, and breathing heavily, Izuku licked his lips as he took a chance, his possibly last chance, to look at Ochako. And looking at her, in that dress, the soft pink haze on her cheeks, and the way her eyes sparkled in the dim light of the apartment's outer walkway, there was no other way to describe Ochako except, heart-stoppingly beautiful. She was so beautiful in fact, that Izuku began to wonder how long she would stay with him. They were friends. They would always be friends, and together, they would form their own agency, like they had discussed at the dinner. But Izuku couldn't help but come to the conclusion that one day, someday, more people would look at Ochako and see just how beautiful, how incredible, how goddess-like she really was. It was honestly crazy no one had yet. Izuku knew one day, someone would also fall in love with Ochako, and she would fall in love with them. Someone would come to sweep her off her feet, and the wonderful, glorious thing she and him had at his moment, would be gone. So Izuku took this singular chance, because there was no guarantee he would ever see her like this again, and burned her transcendent beauty into his heart, mind and soul. This night, this very moment, he wanted to remember for the rest of his life. I guess I'll see you in the morning, Deku. Ochako took a step backwards, her back leaning against her door, her hands behind her back fiddling with the doorknob. Why yeah. Good night, Uraraka. Ochako had the door open and was about to disappear into her apartment before Izuku added, Uraraka. Yeah, Deku? With an unnatural calmness, gifted to him from the power of expensive and old alcohol, Izuku smiled at Ochako and offered, truthfully and openly, you really are beautiful. Ochako closed the door, pressed her back up against the door as she started breathing heavily and quickly, her chest heaving as her heart thundered away. In a voice that perfectly captured how Himiko will sound once she learned about everything that had just happened, her heart fucking screeched at Ochako, bitch. Why didn't you fucking kiss him? And Ochako answered with the only thing she could think of. I don't know. It was raining. No. Calling what was falling from the sky rain wasn't right. The night sky had been ripped open and were being emptied onto a poor island out in the middle of the ocean. Flashes of lightning screamed across the abyss-black sky, and thunder roared in hate-filled anger. The world was ending. The gods in their wrath threw nature's fury at the little spot of desecrated land. Letting the symphony of hate and rage of the world drown everything into the black writhing depths of the ocean. The world was ending. Everything was ending. And Inko didn't care. Even as she almost drowned with every breath filled with rainwater, she didn't care. Even as the very ground beneath her feet melted away to slushing mud, she didn't care. Even as the skeletons of the forest ripped and tore at her body and clothes, she didn't care. Inko didn't care. Because as Inko slammed herself against the white bleached trunk of a dead tree, and as she looked up the mudslide that was once a hill, she saw the bullet coming for her head. That ugly bullet that ripped through everything in its path. Ripped through the storm brought down by the wrath of gods. Ripped through the skeletal remains of a once vibrant green forest. Ripped and tore through everything just to get at her. Inko screamed as she threw herself to the side, and the tree behind her, right where her head had been, exploded into splinters. Crashing into the rolling mud, Inko was carried further down before she dug her boots in and with her free hand grabbed a twisted and gnarled canopy of a fallen tree, its roots so deep that its rotten body still fought against the rushing mud. Inko screamed in agony as she pulled herself into the twisted branches. The skin on her free hand sliced open by the razor-sharp bark. Her body hurt. Hurt as her very home worked to kill her. But she wouldn't let it. Her home may have turned against her, but it was not the enemy she had to focus on. So she ignored the pain. Ignored the betrayal. She pushed it all down as she climbed into the canopy and laid herself prone. Eyes looking up the turbulent rapids towards the crest of the hill. Eyes scanning the dark for her true enemy. While her one hand had been free, she squeezed tight her other. Feeling the worn wood and cold metal under her fingers. Letting her know she still had. Bang! Inko shouldn't have been able to see the bullet coming. It should have hit her before the sound even reached her ears. But the sound of the shot drew her eyes, and she could see the bullet coming for her. That horrible bullet. Twisted and unnatural. A monstrous thing, woven together from pink and blue strands into the weapon of a grim reaper. A pink and blue bullet that was going to blow her head clean off and leave her another nameless corpse. Just like. Inko's eyes snapped open as she jolted out of her bed, twisting in her sheets and slamming into the floor. Eyes wide, she retched and fought against invisible forces that she was sure were trying to drag her to her death. It took her waking mind several long seconds to fight against the nightmare, the memory, that sent her into a terror. Through force of will, she clamped her mouth shut and refused to let out the scream the nightmare demanded of her. No, there would be no scream. She gave the vanishing horror only enraged silence. It took her several long minutes before she found the strength to pull herself up and stand on her own 2 feet. It took her a little while longer to feel her heart stop pounding and the adrenaline in her blood to stop rushing through her veins. But as her body calmed down, her mind was still rumbling and writhing as memories Inko had long thought locked away fought, battering their way back up to the surface. Memories awakened after hearing and saying words she had tried to never speak again. For her own sake. For Hisashi's sake. For her son's sake. They had agreed to leave it all behind. Because they had to leave it all behind. The alternative. Inko sighed, because in reality, there was no alternative for them. At least there hadn't been. Inko stood in the dark and thought of the dinner. Of the words Rikiya had spoken. Words, filtered and reworked to a new age, but still tied to something old. Words the CEO had been gifted. By an employee who knew about the man's obsession with quirks. Hisashi. Of all the things you could try and do, Inko should be mad. She should be furious. She wasn't. Because despite everything, despite the promises they had made to leave it all behind, how could she be mad at Hisashi for falling back, when she had never kept that promise either? She could feel it calling to her. Feel herself getting pulled into her closet. The wooden floor creaked as she walked in. It creaked loudly and shifted as she stepped into the corner. With a sigh, Inko sat down and pressed her hand on some of the floorboards around the closet's corner. They bent in. Inko then lifted her hand up and hovered it over the weak board. Her quirk didn't have the same showy aura that Izuku's had. For Inko, all she felt when she used her quirk was like her hand becoming the pole of a magnet, the object she focused on, the opposite magnetic pole. With a tug, the boards easily popped off the floor, revealing a cubby hole, narrow but a few feet long, tucked away between the rest of the floor and the wall. It had been years since Inko had last opened this little secret. Decades since she had made it. With her back against the wall, Inko closed her eyes and reached inside. Not to pull anything out, because no force in this world could move her to do that, but just to feel the items from her past. A past she had said she no longer had any connection to. A lie. If she had no connection, if she had left it behind, then there would be nothing in this cubby. The first thing her fingers touched was the rough and beaten cover of a very old book. She could still see the faded red cover as she ran her fingers over the cracked and fraying spine. The pages yellow with age and worn from so many rereads. An original edition of The Meta Liberation War. A rare find even when she had picked it up. No changes or rewrites to better reflect and fit with the current status quo of the world. This book still carried the original words of Destro himself. Unaltered and pure. Words she had memorized. Words that even now, after not looking at the book in decades, were still etched into her soul. Words that at the drop of a hat, she could recite perfectly. Even if she didn't mean to. Her hand drifted, and she found it. A feel that had defined her young life as much as it haunted it. The feeling of worn wood and cold metal. Something she had found by chance and had carried with her ever since. Something that had saved her life. Something that had taken others' lives. A relic from a time before quirks. When the world tore itself apart in the midst of its second global war. Inko gripped the relic tightly, fingers instinctually finding the curved metal that her index finger could wrap around so effortlessly while she waged her own war. The trigger of her Arasaka Type 99 rifle. That will be it for this part. I hope everyone enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like and comment if you want part 41. If you want to hear more from me, subscribe. I hope to see you all in the next one.